Hello everyone, I am the narrator and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The old farmhouse loomed before me, a beacon of hope in the relentless storm. I had no idea that by knocking on that door I was sealing my own fate. Rain lashed against my windshield, the wipers working overtime but barely making a dent in the deluge. I squinted trying to make out the road ahead, but it was like driving through a waterfall. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had turned white. I'd been on the road for hours, making my way cross country to start a new job. The storm had come out of nowhere, transforming the peaceful countryside into a treacherous maze of winding roads and low visibility. A flash of lightning illuminated the world for a split second, and that's when I saw a massive tree branch lying across the road directly in my path. I slammed on the brakes, feeling the car hydroplane. My heart leapt into my throat as I fought to regain control. The car skidded to a stop mere inches from the fallen branch. I let out a shaky breath, adrenaline coursing through my veins that was too close. I put the car in reverse, intending to find another route, but the engine sputtered and died. No, 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 I muttered, turning the key again and again. Nothing, just the click of a dead battery. Panic started to set in. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere in the worst storm I'd ever seen with a dead car. I grabbed my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen just showed no service had in mocking letters. Another flash of lightning revealed a distant light through the trees, a house. It was my only hope. Grabbing my raincoat, I took a deep breath and stepped out into the downpour. The rain was cold and relentless, soaking through my clothes. In seconds, I slogged through the mud, my shoes squelching with every step. The wind howled, whipping my hair across my face as I struggled towards the faint glow in the distance. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I reached a rustic wooden fence. Beyond it stood an old farmhouse, its windows glowing warmly against the stormy night. I nearly cried with relief. I hurried up the creaky porch steps and knocked on the door, hugging myself against the chill. Please be home. Please be home. The door creaked open and I found myself face to face with an elderly woman. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun and she wore a floral apron over a simple dress. Oh, you poor dear, she said, her eyes widening at my bedraggled appearance. Come in, out of that awful rain. I stepped inside, gratefully, immediately enveloped by warmth and the smell of freshly baked bread. Thank you so much, I said, my teeth chattering. My car broke down up the road and I was hoping I could use your phone to call for help. Of course, dear, the woman said, closing the door behind me. I'm Martha and this is my husband, Tom. She gestured to an older man who had just entered the room, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Nice to meet you. Tom said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Nasty night to be out driving. I introduced myself and explained my situation as I talked. Martha bustled around, bringing me a towel and insisting I sit by the fire to warm up. I'm afraid our phone lines are down because of the storm, Tom said apologetically. But you're welcome to stay here until morning. We can drive you into town then to get help for your car. I hesitated for a moment. Staying the night with strangers wasn't ideal, but what choice did I have? That's very kind of you, I said. I really appreciate it. Martha beamed. It's no trouble at all. Dear, now let's get you into some dry clothes. I'm sure I have something that will fit you. She led me upstairs to a small guest room, its walls covered in faded floral wallpaper. The bed looked inviting with a handmade quilt spread across it. Martha rummaged in a dresser, pulling out a nightgown and robe. These should do nicely, she said, handing them to me. You get changed and I'll have some hot soup ready when you come down. I thanked her again and she left me alone as I peeled off my wet clothes. I couldn't help but feel grateful for the couple's kindness. It was rare to find people so willing to help a stranger these days. Dressed in the borrowed clothes, I made my way back downstairs. The soup was delicious, rich and warming as I ate. Martha and Tom chatted amiably, asking about my job and where I was from. It all felt so normal, so safe. But as the evening wore on, I began to notice little things that seemed off the way. Tom's eyes would linger on me when he thought I wasn't looking. The tight set of Martha's smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The locks on the outside of the guest room door. I tried to shake off my unease. They were just an ordinary elderly couple being kind to a stranger in need. Wasn't this exactly the sort of heartwarming story you always hope to hear about? As I got ready for bed, I couldn't quite silence the voice in my head telling me something was wrong. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I was cut off from the world, alone with two strangers in the middle of nowhere where sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old house, every howl of wind outside made me jump. I dozed, fitfully plagued by unsettling dreams. A noise jolted me awake. Footsteps in the hallway, a whispered conversation just outside my door. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear "Can't keep her here forever." Martha's voice barely audible. "We'll figure something out," Tom replied, like we always do. The floorboards creaked as they moved away. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they must be able to hear it. What were they talking about? What did they mean? Like we always do. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. I had to get out of here carefully. I tried the door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. Think there had to be a way out the window. I pulled back the curtains and my heart sank. Bars, solid iron bars across every window. This wasn't a quaint farmhouse. It was a prison. I searched the room frantically for anything I could use as a weapon, anything that might help me escape. There was nothing. The room had been carefully stripped of anything useful. A key turned in the lock. I froze my breath, catching in my throat. The door swung open, revealing Martha. Her kind grandmotherly demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look that chilled me to the bone. "Oh, good, you're awake," she said, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "Tom's made breakfast. You must be hungry." I backed away from her, bumping into the dresser. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Martha's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Why, we want you to stay with us, dear. It gets so lonely out here, just the two of us. We need some young blood to liven things up." "You're insane," I said, my voice shaking. "Let me go, please, now." Now she tutted. "That's no way to talk to your new family. Come along now. Breakfast is getting cold." She reached for me and I reacted instinctively. I shoved her hard. She stumbled backwards with a cry of surprise. I didn't wait to see if she fell. I ran out into the hallway, down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the wood. I could hear shouting behind me, heavy footsteps giving chase. The front door was right there. Freedom just steps away. I grabbed the handle and yanked it. Didn't budge. Locked. Of course it was locked. Rough hands seized me from behind. I screamed, kicking and clawing, fighting with everything I had. But Tom was strong, his arms like iron bands around me now. That wasn't very nice. He growled in my ear, "After all our hospitality." Martha appeared, rubbing her arm where she'd hit the wall. The look in her eyes was murderous. I think she needs to learn some manners. "Tom, take her to the basement." "No," I screamed, renewing my struggles. Help somebody help me, but there was no one to hear. No one to help, just the howling of the wind outside drowning out my cries. As Tom dragged me towards a door I hadn't noticed before, the basement stairs loomed before me. Descending into darkness, I could hear faint sounds coming from below. Whimpers, quiet sobs. Oh God, I wasn't the first. How many others had made the mistake of knocking on that door as Tom forced me down the stairs? Step by terrible step, I realized the true horror of my situation. This wasn't just a night of terror. This was the beginning of a nightmare that might never end. The basement door slammed shut behind us, sealing me in darkness. And all I could think was I should have stayed in the car. The village looked like something out of a history book, untouched by time, but as I stepped closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was very, very wrong here. I'd been hiking through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest for days, relishing the solitude and the raw beauty of nature as an avid backpacker. I'd thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for what I stumbled upon that afternoon. The trail I'd been following had grown faint, barely visible beneath the carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. I was beginning to worry I'd strayed too far off the marked path when I caught a glimpse of something through the trees. Smoke-thin wisps curling up into the sky, my spirits lifted. Maybe it was a ranger station or a campground. At the very least, I could ask for directions. I pushed through a thick curtain of ferns and found myself on the edge of a small clearing. What I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a village, but unlike any I'd ever seen. Crude huts made of logs and thatch clustered around a central fire pit. People moved about dressed in rough homespun clothing that looked like something out of the pioneer days. Children chased each other, laughing, while women tended to cooking. Fires and men worked with primitive tools. For a moment, I wondered if I'd stumbled onto some kind of historical reenactment site, but there were no signs, no indicators that this was anything but a real living village. Frozen in time fascination overcame my initial shock as an amateur anthropologist. This was the kind of discovery I'd only dreamed about, a culture untouched by the modern world existing right here in the heart of America. It was incredible. I stepped into the clearing, waving to get someone's attention. "Hello," I called out. "I'm a bit lost. Could someone help me?" The effect was immediate and unsettling. Every head turned towards me, every pair of eyes locking onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The laughter and chatter died away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of fires. A man approached me. He was tall and lean, with a weather-beaten face and calloused hands. His eyes, a startling pale blue, seemed to look right through me. "Welcome, stranger," he said, his voice rough as bark. "You've wandered far from the beaten path." I introduced myself, explaining about my hike and how I'd gotten lost. As I spoke, I noticed more villagers gathering around, watching me with undisguised curiosity and something else, hunger, anticipation. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made me deeply uneasy. "You must be tired," the man said. He introduced himself as Ezra, the village elder. "Come join us, rest, eat. We'll talk about getting you back to your world in the morning." My world, the phrasing struck me as odd, but I was too exhausted and hungry to dwell on it. I followed Ezra to one of the larger huts, acutely aware of the eyes. Following my every move inside the hut, a group of villagers had gathered. They peppered me with questions about the outside world, their eyes wide with wonder as I described things like smartphones and airplanes. It was like talking to time travelers as night fell. They served dinner, a hearty stew that filled my belly and made my eyelids heavy. Ezra showed me to a small hut where I could sleep, assuring me we'd figure out how to get me home in the morning. I should have been elated at my incredible discovery. Instead, as I lay on the rough pallet, I couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. Something about this place, about these people, felt wrong. The way they looked at me, the odd phrases they used, the fact that such a place could exist unknown in this day and age, none of it added up. Sleep came fitfully, filled with unsettling dreams of dark forests and watching eyes. I woke with a start in the pre-dawn gloom. My heart racing. Something had woken me, a sound, a presence. I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the doorway of the hut. Silhouetted against the faint light outside, I recognized her as one of the younger women from the village, barely more than a girl, really. "You need to leave," she whispered urgently now, while everyone's still asleep. I sat up, fully awake now. Why? She glanced nervously over her shoulder before continuing. "This place, it's not what you think. We're not what you think. You have to go before it's too late." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? What is this place?" "There's no time to explain," she hissed. "Just go head east towards the rising sun. Don't stop. Don't look back. If you hear anyone calling your name, ignore it." Run before I could ask anything more. She was gone, melting into the shadows like a ghost. My mind was reeling, but instinct told me to listen to her warning. I grabbed my backpack and slipped out of the hut. The village was quiet. The fires burned down to embers. It would have seemed peaceful if not for the palpable sense of menace. In the air, I made it to the edge of the clearing before I heard it. A low, keening wail that made my blood run cold. It was joined by another, then another, a chorus of inhuman voices rising in the pre-dawn darkness. They knew I was gone. I ran branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear them behind me, their cries growing closer, whatever they were. They moved through the forest with inhuman speed, and Grace, the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to filter through the trees. When I burst out of the forest and onto a rocky slope, I scrambled up loose stones sliding under my feet. If I could just make it to the top, maybe I could see a way out a road, anything. I was halfway up when a hand closed around my ankle. I kicked frantically, connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain and the grip loosened. I CLF'd my way up the last few feet and pulled myself over the top. What I saw stole the breath from my lungs. Spread out below me was a vast valley, and nestled in its heart was a city, a modern city with roads and buildings and the distant sound of traffic. It had been there all along, just on the other side of the mountain. I wanted to laugh with relief, but the sound died in my throat as I turned and saw my pursuers cresting the ridge. They looked like the villagers I'd met would be. Wrong, their skin was pale as milk, their eyes too large, their mouths filled with sharp teeth. They moved with a fluidity that was almost beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. Ezra was at their head, his kindly demeanor gone. Now he looked ancient and terrible, his eyes blazing with an unholy light. "Did you think you could just leave?" he snarled on. "That we let you go back to your world and destroy everything we've built here? What are you?" I managed to choke out. His laugh was like stones grinding together. "We are the old ones, the forgotten ones we've lived in. These woods, since before your kind learned to build cities and worship false gods. We keep to ourselves mostly, but sometimes," his eyes rack over me, hungrily, "sometimes we need new blood." They were closing in, forming a half circle around me. I backed up, and until I felt the edge of the cliff at my heels. Rocks skittered down the steep slope, disappearing into the forest below. "You have two choices," Ezra said, his voice almost gentle now. "Come back with us, join us, become one of us." Or he glanced meaningfully at the cliff behind me. Time seemed to slow down. I looked from the monsters in front of me to the long drop behind me, then to the city in the valley below. So close and yet impossibly far, I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made my choice. I jumped. The wind rushed past me as I fell. The world spinning crazily, I caught glimpses of the sky, the trees, the unforgiving ground rushing up to meet me above. I heard howls of rage and frustration. I'd like to say I had some profound realization in those last moments that my life flashed before my eyes. But all I could think was, this is going to hurt. I crashed through the canopy of trees, branches snapping and clawing at me as I fell, and then suddenly I wasn't falling anymore. I opened my eyes, certain I must be dead, but the pain flooding every inch of my body told me otherwise. Somehow, miraculously, I'd survived. I lay there for a long, long time, afraid to move, afraid that if I did, I'd discover some horrific injury. But eventually I managed to sit up. Nothing seemed to be broken, though I was covered in cuts and bruises. I looked up at the cliff I jumped from. It was high, but not as high as it had seemed. In the moment, a combination of luck tree branches and soft underbrush had saved my life. There was no sign of Ezra or the other creatures. Maybe they couldn't leave their territory. Maybe they thought the fall had killed me. Whatever the reason, I wasn't going to wait around to find out. Every movement was agony, but I forced myself to my feet and started walking east towards the city, towards safety. It took hours, but finally I stumbled out onto a road. A passing motorist took one look at my battered and wild-eyed appearance and called an ambulance in the hospital. I told the police a sanitized version of events, that I'd gotten lost while hiking and fallen down a cliff. They nodded sympathetically, clearly thinking I was just another unprepared tourist who'd underestimated the wilderness. I never told anyone the full story who would believe me. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if the isolation and the fall had caused some kind of hallucination. But on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I remember the village. Frozen in time, the creatures with two sharp teeth, and the terrible choice I had to make. And I know that somewhere out there in the deep dark woods they're still waiting, watching hungry for new blood. The first scream nearly stopped my heart. The second one told me I wasn't imagining things. Something was very wrong in the warehouse tonight, and I was the only one around to deal with it. I'd been working as a night security guard at the Millbrook Industrial Complex for about 6 months. It was an easy gig, mostly just walking around checking locks and making sure no one was where they shouldn't be. The pay wasn't great, but the quiet suited me after 2 tours in Afghanistan. I appreciated a job where the most excitement usually came from chasing away teenagers looking for a place to party. Tonight started like any other. I arrived just before sunset, checked in with the day shift guard, and settled into my routine. The complex was huge, a maze of warehouses and storage units. My first walkthrough usually took about 2 hours. I was halfway through my rounds when I heard a muffled thump coming from warehouse 17. I paused, tilting my head to listen. It could have been nothing old. Buildings make noise all the time, settling and creaking, but something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Warehouse 17 was supposed to be empty. It was a new addition to the complex, not yet in use. No one should have been in there. I approached cautiously, my hand resting on the taser at my hip. As I got closer, I heard more noises, hushed voices, the scrape of something heavy being moved across the floor. My first instinct was to call it in, but I hesitated. If it was just some kids messing around, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Besides, my radio had been acting up lately. Cutting out at random, I decided to take a closer look before raising the alarm. The side door to the warehouse was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the darkness. I eased it open, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. The voices inside fell silent. I slipped inside, keeping close to the wall. The warehouse was dimly lit. Most of the overhead lights off stacks of crates and pallets created a labyrinth of shadows. The air was thick with the smell of dust and machine oil. I moved deeper into the warehouse, my eyes straining to adjust to the gloom. That's when I saw them, 3 men gathered around a stack of crates. They were dressed in dark clothes, their faces obscured by ski masks. One of them was holding a crowbar. My heart rate spiked. This wasn't a bunch of kids looking for thrills. These were professionals. I should have backed outright, then called the police, but curiosity got the better of me. What were they after? What was in those crates that was worth the risk of breaking in? I crept closer, using the stacks of pallets. As cover, the men were talking in low voices, but I could catch snatches of their conversation. Sure, this is the right shipment. Positive boss says it's worth millions. Let's just get it and get out of here. This place gives me the creeps. One of them preed open a crate and I caught a glimpse of what was inside. My breath caught in my throat, guns, high-end military-grade weapons that definitely shouldn't have been there. I'd stumbled onto something big, too big for me to handle alone. I needed to get out to call for backup. I started to back away. My mind raced in, and then my radio crackled to life. Basta Johnson come in. Everything okay out there? The warehouse fell silent. I froze, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. Then one of the men spoke, his voice hard and cold. Find them. I ran. There was no point in stealth now. I sprinted for the exit, hearing shouts and the pounding of feet behind me. I burst out of the warehouse into the cool night air, not daring to look back. I knew the complex better than they did. I weaved between buildings, doubling back and taking random turns trying to lose them, but they were persistent, and I could hear them spreading out, trying to cut me off. I ducked into another warehouse, this one filled with old machinery. I crouched behind a rusted conveyor belt, trying to catch my breath and think I needed to get to a phone to call for help. But my cell was in the guard shack on the other side of the complex, and these guys were between me and it. A sound made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, entering the warehouse. I held my breath, pressing myself against the cold metal of the conveyor belt. We know you're in here. Rent AUP, a voice called out. Come out now and we won't hurt you much. I didn't believe that for a second. These guys weren't leaving any witnesses. The footsteps drew closer. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on a piece of pipe lying nearby. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I gripped the pipe tightly, my palms sweaty. The footsteps were right on the other side of the conveyor belt. Now I could hear the man's breathing, see the beam of his flashlight sweeping back and forth. He rounded the corner and I swung the pipe, connected with a satisfying thunk, and the man went down hard. I didn't wait to see if he was getting up. I ran out of the warehouse into the maze of alleys between buildings. I could hear shouts in the distance. They knew I'd taken one of them out. They'd be even more determined now. I needed a plan. I couldn't keep running forever. Eventually they'd corner me, or I'd make a mistake. I needed to turn the table. Somehow an idea started to form. It was risky, maybe even crazy, but it was the best shot I had. I made my way to Warehouse 12. It was where they stored cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. More importantly, it had a control panel for the complex's sprinkler system. I slipped inside, my eyes quickly adjusting to the dimness. The control panel was on the far wall. I hurried over to it. My fingers flying over the switches. In Afghanistan, I'd worked with the combat engineers enough to pick up a few tricks. I just hoped I remembered them correctly. I heard a noise outside, voices approaching. Time was up. I flipped the last switch and ran for cover. The sprinklers came on with a hiss water raining down throughout the complex. But it wasn't just water. I'd rerouted the system to pull from the tanks of industrial cleaner stored in the warehouse. The whole place was being doused in a cocktail of harsh chemicals. Shouts of surprise and anger erupted outside. I allowed myself a grim smile. Let's see how well they could search with burning eyes and slippery footing. I used the confusion to make my way towards the guard shack. The whole complex was in chaos. Now alarms were blaring, lights flashing. The chemical-laced water made everything slick and dangerous. I was almost there when a figure loomed out of the mist. It was one of the men, his eyes red and streaming from the chemicals. He swung wildly at me with a crowbar. I ducked under the blow and tackled him. Both of us sliding across the wet pavement, we grappled, rolling over and over. He was strong, but I was fighting for my life. I managed to get on top of him, pinning him down. It's over, I growled. The police will be here any minute, as if on cue. I heard sirens in the distance. The man's eyes widened in fear, then narrowed in hatred. With a surge of strength, he threw me off and scrambled to his feet. I watched him run off into the chemical mist, knowing I couldn't catch him. It didn't matter. The police would be here soon, and I had bigger concerns. I made it to the guard shack and called 911. Then the complex's owner. By the time the police arrived, the sprinklers had washed away most of the evidence, but the crate of guns was still there, and my testimony was enough to launch a full investigation in the days that followed. The truth came out. The complex had been used as a waypoint in an international arms smuggling operation. The owner claimed ignorance, but evidence suggested otherwise. The whole thing went much deeper and higher up than anyone had suspected. As for me, I was hailed as a hero. There was talk of promotions, of joining the police force, but I turned it all down. I'd had enough excitement to last a lifetime these days. I work security at a shopping mall. The most action I see is chasing down shoplifters, and that suits me just fine. But sometimes on quiet nights, I remember the warehouse, the guns, the chase, the fear, and the adrenaline. And I wonder what else might be hiding in the dark corners of seemingly ordinary places, waiting for someone to stumble upon it. The footprints appeared overnight, a perfect circle around my tent. I hadn't heard a sound, hadn't sensed a presence, but there they were, silent testimony that I was not alone in these woods. I'd come to the Cascade Mountains to find solitude, to escape the noise and chaos of city life. After a messy breakup and losing my job, I needed time to clear my head, to remember who I was. When the world wasn't pressing in on all sides, the idea of a solo camping trip had seemed perfect. Just me, the wilderness, and my thoughts. I'd spent the last 3 days hiking deeper into the backcountry, relishing the burn in my muscles and the crisp mountain air. Yesterday evening, I'd found the perfect spot to set up camp, a small clearing near a babbling brook surrounded by towering pines, as I pitched my tent and started a small fire. I'd felt a sense of peace settling over me for the first time in months. That peace shattered the moment I unzipped my tent this morning and saw the footprint. They were large, much bigger than my own, and deeply pressed into the soft earth. Whatever had made them was heavy, and there were so many of them forming a perfect circle around my campsite as if something had paced around me all night long. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air I'd encountered wildlife before on my hikes. Deer, the occasional black bear, but this was different. This felt deliberate. I forced myself to take a deep breath to think rationally. It was probably just an animal curious about the strange new smell in its territory. Nothing to panic about still. I decided it might be wise to pack up and move on as I started to break down my tent. A twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around my heart, leaping into my throat. The trees stood silent and still, revealing nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Watching from the shadows, I packed faster, shoving things haphazard into my backpack. Another sound, a rustle of leaves too big to be a squirrel or bird. I spun again, scanning the tree line for a moment. I thought I saw something, a flicker of movement, a shape darker than the surrounding forest. But when I blinked, it was gone. Backpack secured, I didn't bother dousing my fire pit or doing a final sweep of the campsite. Like I normally would, I just wanted to get out of there. I picked a direction away from where I thought I'd seen movement and started walking my pace. Just shy of a run, the forest seemed different now, no longer peaceful and welcoming. Shadows lurked behind every tree, and every sound made me flinch. I tried to focus on my map on finding my way back to the main trail, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely read it. After about an hour hiking, I allowed myself to slow down. My initial panic had faded, replaced by a dull anxiety gnawing at the pit of my stomach. I hadn't seen or heard anything strange since leaving the campsite. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it really had just been an animal. I found a fallen log and sat down, pulling out my water bottle and taking a long drink. As I lowered the bottle, movement caught my eye there about 50 yards away. Standing perfectly still between two massive pines was a figure my breath caught in my throat. It was human shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions slightly off in a way that made my skin crawl. It stood motionless, watching me. I blinked hard, certain I must be seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there, and now it was closer. I scrambled to my feet, nearly tripping over the log in my haste. The figure took a step forward, and I caught a glimpse of its face. If you could call it that, where features should have been. There was only smooth, pale skin like a blank canvas. A scream built in my throat, but fear kept it trapped there. I turned and ran. No longer caring about the trail or my map, I just needed to get away. I crashed through the underbrush branches, whipping at my face and arms. I could hear it behind me, moving through the forest with inhuman speed. And Grace, no matter how fast I ran, it seemed to be getting closer. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me going. I glanced back and immediately wished I hadn't. It was right there, barely 10 feet behind me. Its long arms reaching out, I put on a final burst of speed, my feet flying over the uneven ground. And then they weren't. My toe caught on an exposed road, and suddenly I was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment I hadn't even seen. I rolled and bounced, unable to stop my descent. Pain exploded through my body as I hit rocks and branches. Finally, mercifully, I came to a stop at the bottom landing, hard on my back. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and for a terrifying moment I couldn't breathe. As I lay there, gasped and fighting waves of nausea, I waited for those long, pale hands to grab me, but nothing came. Slowly. Painfully, I managed to sit up. I was in a small gully, the steep sides rising up on either side of me. There was no sign of my pursuer. I did a quick inventory of my injuries. Cuts, bruises, maybe a sprained wrist, but nothing seemed broken. My backpack had taken the brunt of the fall. I was battered but alive. As my breathing steadied and the adrenaline began to fade, doubt crept in. Had I really seen what I thought I saw, or had days of solitude and the stress of recent events caused me to hallucinate? I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but the memory of those footprints' eyes of that blank face was too vivid to dismiss. I knew I should try to find my way back to the trail to civilization, but the thought of climbing back up that embankment and of potentially coming face to face with whatever that thing was filled me with dread. The gully seemed to lead downhill. Water always flows to bigger water. I reasoned if I followed it, I might find a river which could lead me out of the forest. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all I had. I started walking, wincing with every step. The gully was narrow and rocky, forcing me to watch my footing carefully. The forest pressed in close on either side, the trees seeming to lean over the edges, blocking out most of the sunlight as I walked. I tried to make sense of what had happened. What was that thing, a person in some kind of costume? A bear standing on its hind legs? My own fear, addled imagination. None of the explanations quite fit, but I clung to them anyway. The alternative, that there was something in these woods that defied explanation, was too terrifying to contemplate. The day wore on, and the gully showed no signs of widening or leading to a river. My water was running low, and the granola bars in my pack weren't enough to quell the hunger gnawing at my stomach. Worse, I was starting to hear things. Whispers on the wind. Footsteps just out of sight every time I whirled to look. There was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, never left as the light began to fade. Panic set in. I couldn't be out here at night. I couldn't face the darkness knowing that thing might be lurking in it. I started to jog, ignoring the protests of my battered body, just when I was about to give up hope, to curl up in a ball and wait for whatever fate had in store for me. I saw a break in the trees ahead. I pushed myself harder, hope giving me a final burst of energy. I burst out of the gully and found myself on the edge of a small town. Lights glowed warmly in windows, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic. I had never been so happy to see signs of civilization in my life. I stumbled into town, aware of the strange looks I was getting from passers-by. I must have been quite a sight. Dirty, bleeding, wild-eyed with fear and exhaustion. I made my way to the local sheriff's office, collapsing into a chair in the lobby. The deputy on duty was kind. If a bit skeptical of my story, he took my statement, called in a search party to look for other hikers who might be in trouble, and arranged for me to stay at a local motel for the night. As I lay in the motel bed that night, every light in the room blazing, I tried to convince myself that it was over. I was safe now, back in the world of streetlights and cell phones and other people. Whatever I had encountered in the woods, real or imagined, couldn't reach me here. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blank face. And in the quiet moments between the sounds of passing cars and the hum of the air conditioner, I could swear I heard whispers. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, even after I returned home. Even after weeks had passed, I found myself jumping at shadows, always looking over my shoulder. Because deep down I knew the truth. You can leave the forest, but the forest doesn't leave you. And somewhere out there in the deep dark woods, something is waiting, watching, and someday it might just come looking for me again. The moment I saw his eyes in my rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, but by then it was too late. The stranger was in my car, and we were hurtling down a lonely highway into the darkest night of my life. It had started as a normal day. I was driving back from a business trip, a 6-hour journey I'd made dozens of times before. The rain had been relentless since I left the city, pounding against my windshield in sheets. I was tired, the kind of bone exhaustion that makes your eyes burn and your thoughts fuzzy. I just passed a sign indicating the next town was 50 miles away. Way when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, drenched to the skin in the brief illumination of my headlights. I caught a glimpse of a worn backpack and a face that looked as weary as I felt. I'd never picked up a hitchhiker before. It went against everything I'd been taught about safety, but something about the miserable scene made me slow down. Maybe it was fatigue clouding my judgment, or maybe it was a misguided attempt at karma, whatever. The reason I found myself pulling over. The man jogged to my passenger side, and I leaned over to open the door. "Where you headed?" I asked, having to raise my voice. over the drumming of the rain just up the road. Away's he said, climbing in. Appreciate the ride. Mr. Weather's something awful tonight. As he settled in, I got my first good look at him. He was younger than I'd initially thought. Probably in his late 20s, his clothes were soaked through his hair, plastered to his forehead, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. Pale blue and intensely alert, a stark contrast to his bedraggled appearance. I'm Jake, I said. Pulling back onto the highway, there's a town about 50 miles up that far enough. He nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That'll do just fine. Jake name's Ray. We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the hum of the engine, the only sounds. I snuck glances at Rye out of the corner of my eye. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, that faint smile never leaving his lips, so I said, trying to break the awkward silence, "What brings you out here in this weather?" Rye turned to look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a coldness that made me instinctively tighten my grip on the steering wheel. "Oh, he said, his voice low and even just trying to get where I need to go. I nodded. Unsure how to respond, the silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I reached to turn on the radio, desperate for some noise to fill the car. Ray's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was like iron. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Jake," he said softly, "we need to have a little chat, you and I." My heart began to race. I tried to pull my hand away, but his grip only tightened. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Let go of me. Keep driving." Rye said, his tone leaving no room for argument, and listened very carefully. I did as he said, my mind whirling. How had I gotten myself into this situation? What did he want? "You're probably wondering why I'm doing this," Rye said, as if reading my thoughts. "The truth is, Jake, you're not the first person to pick me up tonight, but you might be the last." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "What do you mean?" I asked, though. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Ray's grip on my wrist loosened slightly, but I didn't dare move. "I've been walking this road for a long time, Jake, longer than you can imagine, and I've learned that people like you, kind people, good Samaritans, you're all the same deep down." He leaned in closer, and I could feel his breath on my ear. "You all think you're doing a good deed, don't you? Helping out a stranger in need, but the truth is you do it because it makes you feel good about yourself. It lets you pat yourself on the back and say, 'Look at me, I'm such a nice person.' I wanted to protest, to defend myself, but fear kept me silent." "But I wonder," Ray continued, "how nice you'd be if you knew the truth, if you knew what I've done to the others who picked me up." My blood ran cold. Others. What had he done? "Take the next right," Ray instructed, pointing to a narrow dirt road I hadn't even noticed. I hesitated, my foot hovering over the brake pedal. This was my chance. I could stop the car, try to overpower him, make a run for it. As if sensing my thoughts, Ray pressed something hard and metallic against my ribs. "I wouldn't if I were you. Jake, this gun has already seen plenty of action tonight. Don't make me use it again." My hopes of escape crumbled with shaking hands. I turned onto the dirt road. The trees closed in around us. Branches scraping against the sides of the car, the headlights barely penetrated the darkness ahead. "You know what? I've noticed," Jake Ray said conversationally, as if we were old friends out for a drive. "Most people, when they realize they're in danger, they beg, they plead for their lives, make promises, offer money, but not you. You're different." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want from me?" Ray chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "What do I want? That's a good question." "Jake, a very good question indeed." We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The road got rougher, the car bouncing and jolting over ruts and rocks. Finally, we came to a clearing. Ray told me to stop. "The car, turn off the engine," he instructed, "but leave the headlights on." I did as he said, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the key. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the continued patter of rain on the roof. Get out, Ray said slowly. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. It was cold, soaking through my shirt in seconds. Ray followed, keeping the gun trained on me. Walk to the front of the car, he said as I moved. The headlights illuminated something that made my stomach lurch. A hole. A large rectangular hole dug into the muddy earth. A grave. You've probably figured it out by now. Ray said, coming to stand beside me. This is where your journey ends. Jake, I stared at the hole, my mind struggling to process what was happening. This couldn't be real any moment now. I'd wake up in my own bed, this nightmare, nothing but a fading memory, but the cold rain on my skin, the mud squelching under my feet, the hard press of the gun against my back. It was all too real. Why I managed to croak out, "Why are you doing this?" Ry was quiet for a long moment when he spoke. His voice was softer, almost sad, because someone has to. Jake, someone has to show the world that kindness is a lie, that every good deed has a price. He pushed me forward towards the edge of the hole. I could feel my legs trembling, threatening to give out any last words Ry asked. I closed my eyes, thinking of my family, my friends, all the things I'd left unsaid, the experiences I'd never have. A wave of regret washed over me, followed quickly by a surge of anger. This wasn't fair. I didn't deserve this. I opened my eyes and turned to face Ray. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I do have some last words." Ry raised an eyebrow, looking almost amused. "Well, let's hear them." I took a deep breath. "I picked you up because it was the right thing to do, not for karma, not to feel good about myself because someone needed help and I could provide it. If that makes me a fool in your eyes, so be it, but it doesn't make kindness a lie. It makes it more important than ever." For a moment, Ray just stared at me, then slowly he lowered the gun. "You really believe that, don't you?" he said. Sounding genuinely surprised, I nodded, not trusting myself to speak again. Ray looked at the hole, then back at me. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Maybe," he started, then shook his head, then shook. "No. No, it's too late for that." He raised the gun again, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. The shot never came. Instead, I heard a thud and opened my eyes to see Ray on the ground. The gun lying in the mud beside him. Standing over him was a police officer, taser in hand. More police cars pulled into the clearing, their lights cutting through the darkness as they handcuffed Ray and led him away. One of the officers approached me. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked. I nodded. Still in shock. How did you find us?" The officer smiled. "A couple you picked up earlier tonight reported a suspicious hitchhiker. We've been tracking him for miles." As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had almost happened hit me. I sank to my knees, overcome with relief and residual fear in the days that followed as I gave statements and tried to process the experience. One thought kept coming back to me despite everything. I didn't regret stopping to help, because if kindness truly died, if we stopped helping strangers in need, then people like Ry would win, and that was a world I couldn't bear to live in. The first bullet shattered. The window sprang glass across the cabin floor. The second one missed my head by inches. In that moment, I realized our family vacation had just become a fight for survival. It was supposed to be a perfect getaway. My wife, Sarah, and our two kids, Emily, 12, and Max, 8, had been looking forward to this trip for months a week, in a cozy cabin nestled in the mountains, far from the chaos of the city, in the demands of our busy lives. No phones, no internet, just quality family time surrounded by nature. The first few days were everything we'd hoped for. We hiked through lush forests, roasted marshmallows over a crackling fire, and spent evenings playing board games by lamplight. It was idyllic, peaceful. In a way our lives rarely were. On the fourth night, everything changed. We just finished dinner and were cleaning up when we heard the sound of a car approaching. This was odd. Our cabin was miles from the main road, and we hadn't seen another soul since we arrived. Sarah and I exchanged a look of concern. "Kids, go to your room," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mom and I need to check something out." Emily, always perceptive, caught the tension in my voice. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetie." Sarah reassured her, ushering both kids towards their bedroom. We just need to talk to whoever's here. It's probably just the property manager checking in as soon as the kids were out of sight. I moved to the window, peering out into the gathering dusk. A battered pickup truck had pulled up in front of the cabin, its headlights cutting through the twilight. 3 men got out, all carrying weapons. My heart rate spiked. These weren't property managers or lost tourists the way they moved. The furtive glances they cast around these men were trouble. "Sarah," I whispered urgently, "get the kids. We need to hide." She nodded, her face pale but determined as she slipped away to get Emily and Max. I quickly turned off all the lights in the main room. Maybe if they thought the cabin was empty, they'd leave us alone. It was a futile hope. The men approached the cabin, their voices low but carrying in the still mountain air. "This is the place." One of them said, "Has to be middle of nowhere. No neighbors for miles. Perfect spot to lay low for a while." Another agreed, "Let's just hope it's empty." I retreated from the window, my mind racing. Who were these men? What were they running from? And more importantly, how are we going to get out of this? Sarah returned with the kids, both looking scared and confused. I put a finger to my lips, signaling for silence, and pointed towards the back of the cabin. There was a small storage space there, barely big enough for all of us, but it was our best chance at hiding. We had just closed the hidden door behind us when we heard the sound of breaking glass. They were huddled in the darkness. I held Sarah's hand tightly. Emily had her arms wrapped around Max, who was trembling but staying remarkably quiet. We could hear the men moving through the cabin, opening doors, rifling through our belongings. "Looks like someone's staying here." One of them called out clothes food. But where are they? My blood ran cold. They knew we were here somewhere. It was only a matter of time before they found us. "Search every inch," another voice commanded. "They can't have gone far, and remember, we can't leave any witnesses." Sarah stifled a gasp, and I squeezed her hand harder. The gravity of our situation was sinking in. These men weren't just looking for a place to hide, they were willing to kill to keep their location secret. The sound of footsteps grew closer. A floorboard creaked just outside our hiding spot. We held our breath, every muscle tense, waiting for the moment of discovery. Then, miraculously, the footsteps moved away. They hadn't found the hidden door for hours. We remained frozen in that tiny space, listening to the men make themselves at home. In our cabin, they drank our beer, ate our food, and discussed their plans in low voices. From what we could gather, they had robbed a bank in a nearby town and were waiting for things to cool down before making their escape. As night deepened, the men settled into sleep. This was our chance. If we could somehow get past them into our car, we might be able to escape. I leaned close to Sarah's ear, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm going to create a distraction when I do take the kids and run for the car. Don't wait for me." She shook her head vehemently, but I cued her face in my hands. "Please, Sarah," it's the only way. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she nodded. I kissed her softly, then hugged both kids. "Remember what we practiced in our fire drills," I whispered to them. "Stay low, move fast, and don't look back. Okay?" They nodded, their eyes wide with fear, but trusting. Taking a deep breath, I eased open the hidden door. The main room was dark, illuminated. Only by moonlight filtering through the windows I could make out the shapes of 2 men sleeping on the couches. The third must be in one of the bedrooms. I crept towards the kitchen, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake them. Reaching the counter, I grabbed a heavy cast-iron pan. This was it. No turning back now. With all my strength, I hurled the pan through the front window. The crash was deafening in the quiet night. Instantly, the men were awake, shouting in confusion. Now I yelled, grabbing a chair and swinging it at the nearest man as he stumbled to his feet. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah and the kids make a dash for the door. The man I'd hit was down, but the other was reaching for his gun. I tackled him, both of us crashing to the floor. We grappled desperately each. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed it. I was doing my own rounds when I saw Dr. Hayes slip into Mrs. Abernathy's room. Mrs. Avery was one of our long-term residents, a sweet old lady with advanced dementia. She rarely had visitors, let alone middle of the night. Checkups from doctors curious. I paused outside the door listening. I could hear Dr. Hayes speaking softly but couldn't make out the words. Then silence. A few moments later, he emerged looking startled to see me there. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, yes," he replied. His smile not quite reaching his eyes, just a routine check. "Mrs. Abernathy was a bit restless, so I gave her something to help her sleep." I nodded, but something didn't sit right. We had strict protocols about administering medication, especially to patients with dementia, and I hadn't heard anything about Mrs. Avery being restless. Over the next few nights, I started paying closer attention to Dr. Hayes. I noticed a pattern emerging. He would always visit certain patients, all elderly, all with limited or no family involvement. And after his visits, those patients would sleep unusually deeply. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just being thorough, paying extra attention to our most vulnerable residents, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It came to a head about a week after Dr. Hayes started. I was doing my 3 a.m. rounds when I heard a commotion from Mr. Grayson's room. Mr. Grayson was a relatively new resident, still sharp as a tack. Despite his 85 years, I rushed to his room expecting to find him having a night terror or maybe a fall. Instead, I found Dr. Hayes leaning over Mr. Grayson's bed, a syringe in his hand. Mr. Grayson was awake, struggling weakly against the doctor's grip. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my heart pounding. Dr. Hayes straightened up his face, a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Grayson was having some chest pains. I was just about to administer a mild sedative to help him relax." But Mr. Grayson's eyes told a different story. They were wide with fear, silently pleading for help. "I'll take it from here, doctor." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Why don't you go check on the other patients for a moment?" I thought he might argue, but then he nodded. Pocketing the syringe and leaving the room as soon as he was gone, I turned to Mr. Grayson. "Are you all right?" I asked, checking his vitals. His heart was racing, but otherwise he seemed okay. He was trying to kill me." Mr. Grayson whispered, his voice shaking, said it was for my own good, that he was freeing me from suffering. "But I'm not suffering, Rachel. I don't want to die." A chill ran down my spine. I patted Mr. Gior's hand, assuring him he was safe now, but my mind was reeling. Was it possible? Could Dr. Hayes be? I needed proof. If what Mr. Grayson said was true, we were dealing with something far more sinister than I'd imagined. But I couldn't go to the administration with just suspicions and the word of a potentially confused patient. Over the next few nights, I became a detective in my own workplace. I started keeping meticulous notes on Dr. Hayes' movements, which patients he visited, how long he spent with each one. I even managed to sneak a peek at some of his documentation, noting discrepancies between what he recorded and what I observed. But it was when I started looking into our recent deaths that the full horror of the situation became clear. In the month since Dr. Hayes had started, our death rate had nearly doubled. All the deaths were ruled as natural causes: heart failure, stroke, pneumonia, all perfectly plausible in a nursing home. But all of them had been patients Dr. Hayes had spent significant time with. I knew I had to do something, but I was terrified. If I was right, I was dealing with a serial killer. If I was wrong, I could be throwing away my career over paranoid suspicions. It all came to a head on a rainy Thursday night. I was in the medicine room double-checking some dosages when I heard the door open behind me. I turned to see Dr. Hayes standing there, that too-perfect smile on his face. "Rachel," he said, his voice soft, "I think it's time we had a chat." My heart leapt into my throat. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, "Of course, doctor, what about—" He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I think you know you've been watching me, haven't you, poking around in my business?" I swallowed hard, my eyes darting to the door. He was blocking my only exit. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my trembling voice betrayed me. Dr. Hayes sighed, shaking his head. "I had such hopes for you, Rachel. I thought you might understand what we do here. It's a kindness, really. These people, they're suffering, lingering. We're freeing them by killing them." I couldn't keep the horror out of my voice. "That's not our decision to make. We're supposed to care for them, not play God." His eyes hardened, all pretense of warmth vanishing. I was afraid you'd see it that way. Such a shame you were a good nurse. Rachel, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a syringe. My blood ran cold as I recognized it as the same one he tried to use on Mr. Grayson. Don't worry, he said, advancing towards me. It won't hurt. You'll just go to sleep and never wake up. It's peaceful, really. I backed up, my mind racing. I needed to stall to find a way out. How many, I asked, how many have you killed? He paused, considering here about a dozen, but I've worked in many facilities over the years. I've freed hundreds from their suffering. I felt sick. How had he gotten away with this for so long? How many families had mourned? Loved ones never knowing their deaths were far from natural. As he spoke, I'd been inching towards the shelves behind me now. My hand closed around a heavy bottle of liquid medication. Without thinking, I hurled it at him. The bottle caught him in the shoulder, causing him to stumble. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I shoved past him, yanking the door open and running into the hallway. Help, I screamed, my voice echoing through the quiet. Hall, somebody help! I could hear Dr. Hayes behind me, his footsteps pounding on the linoleum. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my heart feeling like it might burst from my chest just as I thought my legs might give out. I saw a light ahead, the security office. I burst through the door, startling the night guard awake. Call the police, I gasped. Dr. Hayes, he's killing patients. The next few hours passed in a blur. The police arrived. Dr. Hayes was arrested. They found evidence in his locker, detailed records of his victims, drugs that had no place in a nursing home. It was over in the days that followed as the full extent of Dr. Hayes' crimes came to light. I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. How could someone sworn to help people cause so much harm? How had we all been so blind? But amid the horror and the guilt, there was also a sense of relief. We had stopped him no more. Families would lose loved ones to his twisted idea of mercy now. As I walk the quiet halls of Oakwood at night, I'm more vigilant than ever. Every patient, every visitor, every new staff member is scrutinized, because I've learned the hard way that sometimes the real monsters wear white coats and winning smiles, and the most vulnerable among us need our protection more than we ever realized. The lock clicked shut with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. In that moment, I knew the rundown motel room had become our prison, and the kindly old couple who ran the place were anything but ordinary. In Keepers, it was supposed to be a quick overnight stay. My wife Olisa and I were on our way to her sister's wedding, a grueling 14-hour drive that we decided to break up into 2 days. We'd been on the road for hours, bickering about directions and growing increasingly irritable as fatigue set in, when we spotted the neon vacancy sign of the Pine Grove Motel glowing dimly in the gathering dusk. It seemed like a godsend. The place had seen better days with its peeling paint and flickering lights, but at that point we would have settled for a barn with a roof. The office was empty when we walked in, a small bell above the door announcing our arrival. After a moment, an elderly woman emerged from the back room, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun and a warm smile on her face. Well, hello there, she said, her voice warm and grandmotherly, looking for a room for the night. We nodded, grateful for any port in the storm of our exhaustion. As Lisa handled the paperwork, I noticed an old man watching us from the doorway of the back room. His gaze was intense, almost hungry, but when I met his eyes, he quickly looked away. I'm Martha, and that's my husband, George, the woman said, handing us an actual metal key. No key cards here. You're in room 7, just down at the end. There, let us know if you need anything at all. We thanked her and made our way to the room. It was basic but clean, with faded floral wallpaper and a bed that creaked ominously when we sat on it. But it was a place to rest, and that was all we cared about after a quick dinner of vending machine snacks. The only food available in this tiny town, we settled in for the night. I was just drifting off when a noise outside our door jolted me awake. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pausing right outside our room. I held my breath, straining to hear. After a moment, they moved on. Probably just another guest, I told myself, but a nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me relax. Did you hear that? Lisa whispered, and I realized she was awake too. Yeah, I replied softly. Probably nothing. Try to get some sleep, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old building, every disc sound had us on edge. Something about this place felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was around 2 a.m. When we heard it, a scream quickly muffled coming from somewhere nearby. Lisa sat bolt upright, her eyes wide with fear. What was that? She hissed. I don't know, I said, already out of bed and pulling on my jeans. Stay here, I'm gonna check it. Out, are you crazy? Lisa grabbed my arm. You can't go out there, but my mind was made up. If someone was in trouble, I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I gave Lisa a reassuring kiss and headed for the door. The night air was cool on my skin as I stepped outside. The motel was silent now. No sign of whatever had caused that scream. I walked slowly along the row of rooms, my senses on high alert as I passed room 3. I heard a muffled sob coming from inside. I pressed my ear to the door, listening intently. There it was again, along with what sounded like a man's voice. Low and threatening, my heart was pounding as I debated what to do. Call the police, but I didn't even know where exactly we were and who knew how long it would take them to arrive. Knock on the door. But what if I was misreading the situation before I could decide? A hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around ready to defend myself, only to find myself face to face with George, the old man from the office. Everything all right, son? He asked, his voice deceptively mild. It's awful late to be out for a stroll. I thought I heard something? I stammered, suddenly feeling foolish. A scream or George's grip on my shoulder tightened painfully. Oh, that was probably just the TV folks like to watch their scary movies. You know, why don't you head on back to your room now? Wouldn't want your wife to worry. The mention of Lisa snapped me out of my daze. How did he know I was here with my wife? We hadn't mentioned it when checking in, right? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sorry to bother you. Good night. I walked back to our room, feeling George's eyes on me the whole way. As soon as I was inside, I locked the door and turned to Lisa, who was sitting up in bed, looking terrified. We need to leave, I said, already grabbing our bags. Now what happened out there? I quickly filled her in as we dressed and packed. She was skeptical at first, but something in my voice must have convinced her of the urgency. We were just about to open the door when we heard it. The sound of a key turning in the lock from the outside. P. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Lisa's hand and pulled her into the bathroom, closing the door as quietly as I could. We huddled in the bathtub, hardly daring to breathe as we heard the room door open. Footsteps slow, deliberate, just like before now. Now Martha's voice called out. Sickly sweet. No need to hide, dears. We just want to talk. Lisa's hand tightened in mine. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything we could use to defend ourselves. There was nothing but a flimsy plastic shower curtain and some miniature soap bars. The bathroom door handle jiggled. Come on out. George's gruff voice. Joined his wives. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. My mind was racing. What did they want money, but somehow I knew it was more than that. The hungry look in Joy G's eyes when we arrived, the muffled sounds from room 3, this was something far more sinister. The bathroom door burst open. Martha and George stood there looking nothing like the kindly ink keepers. From earlier, their eyes were cold, calculating. George held a wicked-looking knife while Martha clutched what looked like a doctor's bag. Well, aren't you two a pair of troublemakers? Martha said, her smile now more of a leer. Can't have you running off and spoiling our little operation now, can we? What do you want from us? I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. George chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. Oh, it's not about what we want, boy. It's about what our clients want. And they pay top dollar for fresh, healthy specimens like yourselves. A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. Human trafficking, organ harvesting, whatever it was, we were in serious danger. Now, Martha said, reaching into her bag, this will only hurt for a moment, then you'll wake up somewhere new, ready to fulfill your purpose. As she approached with a syringe, survival instinct took over. I lunged forward, tackling George. We crashed to the floor, the knife skittering away. Lisa screamed as Martha tried to grab her. but my brave wife fought back, knocking the syringe from the old woman's hand. What followed was chaos, fists flying, bodies grappling in the tiny bathroom. I managed to land a solid punch on George's jaw, stunning him. Long enough for me to scramble to my feet, Lisa had somehow gotten Martha in a headlock, her face red with exertion run. I yelled, grabbing Lisa's hand and pulling her with me. We burst out of the bathroom, out of the room into the cool night air behind us. I could hear George and Martha shouting, their voices filled with rage. We ran like we'd never run before, our bare feet slapping against the pavement. I had no idea where we were going, only that we needed to get as far away from that motel as possible, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. We spotted lights ahead, a truck stop open 24 hours. We burst through the doors, gasping for breath, probably looking like lunatics to the startled cashier. "Please," Lisa managed between gulps of air. "Call the police? The Motel Pine Grove there." The cashier, bless her, didn't ask questions. She took one look at our terrified faces and picked up the phone. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and cups of bad coffee. By the time dawn broke, we learned the full horror of what we'd escaped. The Pine Grove Motel had been the center of a human traffic operation for years. George and Martha, whose real names we never learned, had been luring in unsuspecting travelers, drugging them and selling them to the highest bidder. We were lucky so many others hadn't been, as we finally pulled away from the truck stop, heading towards Lisa's sister's wedding. Very, very late now, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd come to becoming just another statistic. How a simple decision to stop for the night had nearly cost us everything. These days, we don't stay at small, out-of-the-way motels anymore. We plan our trips meticulously, sticking to well-known hotel chains in populated areas. Some might call us paranoid. But after what we experienced at the Pine Grove Motel, we know better than most that sometimes the real monsters are hiding behind friendly smiles and vacancy signs. I never thought a simple curtain malfunction would lead to the most terrifying night of my life. But as I stood there, frozen in fear, watching the man in the room across the courtyard stare directly at me, I realized that sometimes horror doesn't announce itself. It creeps in silently, while when you least expect it. My name is Emma, and I was staying at the Pinewood Hotel for a week-long business conference. It wasn't a fancy place, just your average mid-range hotel in a busy city, the kind of place you stay when your company is footing the bill but doesn't want to splurge. I'd arrived late Sunday evening, exhausted from a day of travel. After a quick shower, I collapsed into bed, barely registering the details of my room. Beyond noting that it faced an interior courtyard, Monday was a blur of meetings and networking. By the time I got back to my room that evening, my feet were aching and my head was pounding. All I wanted was a hot bath and a good night's sleep. I was just about to close the curtains when I noticed a man in the room directly across the courtyard, standing at his window, staring right at me. Our eyes met and a chill ran down my spine. There was something off about his gaze, too intense, too focused. I quickly pulled the curtains closed, my heart racing. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just another G-guest happening to look out his window at the same time, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every noise in the hallway, every creak of the building had me on edge. I kept imagining that man's eyes boring into me from across the courtyard the next morning. I almost laughed at myself in the bright light of day. My fears seemed silly and overblown. I went about my day, pushing the incident to the back of my mind. But when I returned to my room that evening, the feeling of unease returned. I found myself hesitating before opening the curtains, half afraid of what I might see. Nothing. The room across the way was dark, its curtains drawn. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. See? I told myself nothing to worry about. I was just settling in with some work documents when a movement caught my eye. The curtain in the room across the courtyard twitched just slightly, but enough to make me freeze slowly. Almost imperceptibly, the curtain parted, and there he was again. The same man standing in the shadows of his room, staring directly at me. I jumped up, my heart pounding. This couldn't be a coincidence. I slammed my curtain shut and sat on the bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Should I call the front desk? But what would I say? that a man in another room was looking out his window, they'd think I was crazy. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't concentrate every few minutes. I found myself glancing at the curtains, half expecting to see a shadow there. Around midnight, I finally gave up on work and decided to try to sleep. But as I was changing into my pajamas, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold and knock at my door. I stood there, frozen, hoping I'd imagined it. Then it came again, louder this time. Housekeeping, a voice called out. I frowned. Housekeeping at midnight? No, thank you. I called back, my voice shaking slightly. I'm fine for tonight. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps moving away. I let out a shaky breath and double-checked the lock on my door. Sleep was impossible now. I sat in a chair facing the door, jumping at every sound around 2 a.m. My eyelids started to droop. Despite my fear, I was just considering trying to lie down when I heard it. A keycard in my door lock. My heart leapt into my throat. I watched in horror as the handle turned and the door began to open without thinking. I lunged forward and slammed my body against the door. Forcing it shut, I heard a grunt of surprise from the other side. Who's there? I shouted, my voice high with panic. I've called security. It was a bluff. My phone was on the nightstand. Out of reach, but it worked. I heard rapid footsteps retreating down the hallway, shaking. I slid the security chain into place and called the front desk. The night manager sounded concerned and promised to send security up right away. The security guard who arrived, a middle-aged man named Frank, listened to my story with a frown. He checked the hallway and the electronic lock on my door, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The system shows no entry attempts except for your own key card, he explained. Are you sure you didn't imagine it? I insisted that I hadn't, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. In the end, he promised to keep an eye on my floor for the rest of the night and left me alone once again. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every sound, every shadow had me on high alert. When dawn finally broke, I was a wreck. I seriously considered checking out and finding another hotel. But I had meetings scheduled all day, and the thought of trying to find a new place and move all my things was overwhelming. Besides, in the light of day, my fears once again seemed overblown. Maybe I had imagined the keycard sound. Maybe it had just been another guest mistaking my room for theirs. I decided to stay, but I took precautions. I asked the front desk to change my room key and not give out any information about me. I bought a doorstop to wedge under my door at night, and I kept my curtains firmly closed for the next 2 days. Nothing unusual happened. I started to relax, to think that maybe it had all been a product of stress and an overactive imagination. Then came Thursday night. I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. I see you. I froze my blood, turning to ice in my veins. It had to be a mistake, a wrong number. I tried to convince myself of that. Even as another text came through, blue looks good on you. I looked down at my blue pajamas, then at the firmly closed curtains. How with shaking hands I called the front desk. The night manager answered, sounding bored. This is Emma Johnson in room 412, I said. Trying to keep my voice steady, I think someone is stalking me. They're sending me texts about what I'm wearing, but my curtains are closed. Is there any way someone could see into my room from outside? There was a long pause when the manager spoke again. His voice had lost its bored tone. Miss Johnson, please stay in your room and lock the door. I'm calling the police right now. What? Why, my panic was rising. What's going on, Miss Johnson? He said slowly. We don't have a room. 412? You're in room? 417. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Room 417, the room I'd been moved to after complaining about the man across the courtyard, the room I thought was safe. A sound behind me made me whirl around. There, emerging from my closet, was the man from across the courtyard. He smiled, and in his hand I saw the glint of a knife. Hello, Emma, he said softly. I've been waiting for this moment all week. What happened next was a blur of terror and adrenaline. I remember screaming, throwing anything I could get my hands on at him. I remember the burn in my legs as I ran down the hallway, the man right behind me. Somehow I made it to the stairwell, I took the stairs 3 at a time, my lungs burning. Hearing his footsteps echoing behind me, I burst out into the lobby screaming for help. The night manager was there looking stunned, and beyond him, like angels of mercy, were 2 police officers just entering the hotel. They subdued the man after a brief struggle as they led him away in handcuffs. I learned the full horror of what I'd escaped. His name was Robert Dyer, and he was wanted in 3 states for stalking assault and attempted murder. He worked as a freelance maintenance man using his jobs to gain access to hotel security systems. He would choose a victim hack into their room security camera and watch them for days. Before making his move, the police found a laptop in his room with footage from my room's hidden camera. They also found a collection of trophies from his previous victims. I was to be his grand finale before moving on to a new city. As I sat in the hotel lobby wrapped in a shock blanket and giving my statement to the police, I couldn't stop shaking. How long had he been watching me? How many times had he been in my room while I slept? The violation I felt was profound and sickening in the days and weeks that followed as I dealt with police interviews and court appearances. I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I jumped at shadows, flinched at unexpected noises. I couldn't stay in a hotel without thoroughly searching the room for hidden cameras. But slowly, with time and therapy, I began to heal. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen to that little voice that says something isn't right. I became an advocate for better security measures in hotels and for stricter background checks for maintenance staff. Now, years later, I still think about those nights at the Pinewood Hotel, about how close I came to becoming another statistic, another trophy for a deranged killer, and when I travel, I always check in. Under an alias, always inspect my room thoroughly, and always keep my curtains closed, because I learned the hard way that sometimes the real danger isn't outside your window. Sometimes it's already in the room with you, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike the moment he stepped through the cabin door. I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. His smile was friendly, but his eyes were cold. As the storm raging outside, we'd invited a wolf into our shelter, and now we were trapped with him. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. My friends Mike, Sarah, and Jen and I had planned this hiking trip for months. We'd found a great deal on a remote cabin in the Rockies, perfect for a few days of outdoor adventure and nights around the fireplace. The first 2 days were everything we'd hoped for. We hiked trails with breathtaking views, spotted wildlife, and spent evening playing board games and sharing stories. It was on the 3rd day that everything changed. We woke to dark clouds and the distant rumble of thunder. Mike, our resident weather enthusiast, frowned at the sky. "Looks like a big storm rolling in. We might want to consider heading back early," but none of us wanted to cut the trip short. We decided to do one last hike before the weather turned, planning to hunker down in the cabin. If the storm got bad, we should have listened to Mike halfway through our hike. The sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets, quickly soaking through our clothes. The temperature dropped rapidly, and soon we were shivering as we trudged back towards the cabin. We were about a mile out when we heard it, a cry for help, barely audible over the howling wind. We paused, looking at each other uncertainly. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" A figure emerged from the trees, hunched against the rain. As he got closer, I could make out a man probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Oh, thank God," he said, his voice filled with relief. "I thought I was done for, got turned around in this storm, lost my bearings completely." We introduced ourselves, and he told us his name was David. He explained he'd been on a solo camping trip when the storm hit our cabins. "Not far," Sarah offered. "You can wait out the storm with us if you'd like." David's face lit up, really. That would be amazing. "I can't thank you enough." As we walked back to the cabin, David chatted easily about his love for the outdoors and his job as a freelance photographer. By the time we reached the cabin, we were all shivering and eager to get inside. Mike got a fire going while Jen and Sarah rustled up some dry clothes for David to borrow. I made a pot of coffee, hoping to ward off the chill that had settled into my bones. As we gathered around the fire, mugs in hand, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. There was something off about David, though I couldn't put my finger on what. The way his eyes darted around the cabin, taking in every detail. the slight tension in his shoulders as if he was ready to spring into action at any moment. I tried to push the feeling aside. He was probably just on edge from getting lost in the storm. We were all a bit rattled as the evening wore on. David regaled us with stories of his travels and adventures. He was charming funny and seemed genuinely grateful for our hospitality, but every now and then I'd catch a look in his eyes that didn't match his easy smile, a coldness, a calculation that made my skin crawl. We decided to turn in early, all of us. Exhausted from the day's events, there was only one spare bedroom which we offered to David. The rest of us settled into our usual sleeping arrangements. Mike and Sarah in one room, Jen on the couch, and me in my sleeping bag on the floor. I lay awake for hours listening to the storm rage outside and the unfamiliar sound of David's footsteps moving around upstairs. Every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt of anxiety through me. It was well past midnight when I heard it. The soft click of a door opening followed by careful footsteps on the stairs. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. The steps paused at the bottom of the stairs, then slowly they moved towards the living room where Jen was sleeping. I heard a rustling sound, then Jen's sleepy voice. "What's going on? Sheesh." David's voice. Low and menacing, "Don't make a sound." Ice flooded my veins. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, fumbling in the dark for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a heavy flashlight just as I heard Jen let out a muffled scream. I burst into the living room, clicking on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a scene from a nightmare. David stood over Jen, one hand clamped over her mouth, the other holding a wicked-looking knife. "Get away from her," I shouted, swinging the flashlight wildly. David's head snapped towards me, his eyes glinting with a feral light for a moment. We were frozen in a tableau of terror. David poised over me with my pathetic flashlight. Jen's eyes wide with fear, then everything exploded into motion. David lunged at me, the knife flashing in the beam of the flashlight. I swung the flashlight with all my might, connecting with his arm. The knife clattered to the floor. Jen's scream, finally broke free. Piercing the night, I heard doors slamming open upstairs. Mike and Sarah awakened by the commotion. David and I grappled, crashing into furniture. He was stronger than me. Fueled by a manic energy, his hands found my throat-squeezing spots, danced in my vision as I struggled to breathe. Suddenly, the pressure was gone. Mike had tackled David from behind, sending them both sprawling. Sarah ran to Jen, who was sobbing hysterically. "Call the police?" I gasped, my voice raspy. Sarah fumbled for her phone, but David laughed, a chilling sound. Devoid of any humor, no signal, he said. His voice eerily calm despite being pinned under. "Mike storms knocked out the cell towers. We're all alone out here." A chill ran down my spine as I realized he was right. We were miles from the nearest town with no way to call for help. "Why are you doing this?" Mike demanded, struggling to keep David pinned. David's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "Why, because I can, because there's nothing quite like the thrill of the hunt, and you..." For he licked his lips, a gesture that made my stomach turn. "You four are going to be so much fun." It was like a mask had fallen away, revealing the monster that had been hiding behind David's friendly facade. This was a predator, and we were his prey. What followed was the longest night of my life. We managed to tie David up using extension cords, but none of us felt safe enough to sleep. We huddled together in the living room, jumping at every creak of the old cabin. Every howl of the wind outside. David kept talking his words, a mixture of threats and twisted philosophizing. He told us about the others he'd hunted, the rush he felt when he took a life. We tried to ignore him, but his voice warmed its way into our heads, feeding our fear. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to subside. We debated what to do. Should we try to hike out, risking running into potential accomplices David might have, or stay put and hope someone would come looking for us when we didn't return? As scheduled, in the end, Mike and I decided to make a run for it, leaving Sarah and Jen to guard David. The hike down the mountain was treacherous, the trails slick with mud and debris from the storm. Every snapping twig made us whirl around, half expecting to see David somehow free. And in pursuit, when we finally reached the ranger station, we were mud-caked, exhausted, and on the verge of hysteria. The rangers were skeptical at first, but something in our eyes must have convinced them. They called in police backup and headed up to the cabin with us in tow. We arrived to find the cabin door wide open. My heart sank as we rushed inside. The extension cords lay on the floor, cut clean through. Sarah and Jen were huddled in a corner, shaken but unharmed. David was gone. The police launched a massive manhunt, but David seemed to have vanished into the vast wilderness in the days that followed as we gave statements and tried to process what had happened. We learned the truth about our uninvited guest. His real name wasn't David. He was Sean Carlisle, a serial killer, one wanted in 3 states. He'd been using the wilderness as his hunting ground for years, preying on hikers and campers. Foolish enough to trust a friendly stranger, we had been lucky so many others hadn't been. It's been 5 years since that night in the cabin. We've all been through therapy, trying to deal with the trauma and the guilt. Guilt that we let him in. Guilt that we couldn't stop him. Guilt that others might suffer because we couldn't keep him contained. I still hike. Still love the outdoors, but I'm never truly at ease in the wilderness anymore. Every stranger on the trail is a potential threat. Every rustle in the bushes could be a predator lying in wait, and on stormy nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself back in that cabin watching a wolf in human clothing walk through our door, knowing that our lives will never be the same. The moment the last customer left, I knew something was wrong. The air in the diner changed thick with tension and unspoken threats. 5 men remained, their eyes fixed on me with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. My name's Sarah, and I've been working the night shift at Mel's Diner for about 2 years now. It's a small place just off the highway, the kind of joint truckers and late-night travelers stop at for a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. Most nights are quiet, with just a steady trickle of weary patrons looking for a quick bite before hitting the road again. This particular Tuesday night had been slow even by our standards. A few regulars had come and gone, and by 2 a.m. the place was empty except for these 5 guys who'd rolled in around midnight. They'd been loud and a bit rowdy, but nothing I couldn't handle. I dealt with my fair share of drunk and disorderly types over the years, but as the night wore on and they showed no signs of leaving, I started to get nervous. There was something off about them, a predatory vibe that set my teeth on edge. They'd spread out, taking up different booths, effectively surrounding the counter where I stood. "Hey, sweetheart," the biggest one called out. Let's call him Beard, on account of the scraggly mess on his face. How about another round of coffee? I plastered on my best waitress smile, the one I use when I'm trying to hide my discomfort. "Sure thing, but guys, I hate to be a buzzkill, but we close in 15 minutes. Beard exchanged glances with his buddies, a silent communication passing between them that made my stomach clench. "H, come on now," he said. His tone jovial, but with an undercurrent of menace. "Surely you can stay open a little longer for your best customers." I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. "Sorry, boys' rules are rules. I got to close up shop and head home. Huh, this from another guy, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his neck. We'll call him Snake. You got someone waiting for you there, sweetheart." The question sent a chill down my spine. I thought of my empty apartment, of how no one would miss me until my shift tomorrow evening. My boyfriend. I lied smoothly. He's probably wondering where I am already. Beard grinned, showing teeth that were too white and sharp for comfort now. No need to FIB to us. "We're all friends here, aren't we, friends? Right, friends? Don't make your skin crawl or your heart race with fear." I busied myself with wiping down the counter, trying to look anywhere but at their faces. My mind was racing, looking for a way out of this situation. The phone was in the back office. My cell was in my locker. The nearest houses were a good half-mile down the road, you know. Beard said, standing up and stretching leisurely. I'm thinking, maybe we don't want coffee after all. Maybe we want something a little stronger. You got any booze stashed away back there? I shook my head, taking an involuntary step back as he approached the counter. "Sorry, we don't serve alcohol here." He leaned in close enough that I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his breath. "Come on, Sarah, I'm sure a smart girl like you knows where the good stuff is hidden." A jolt of fear shot through me. I hadn't told them my name. "How do you know my name?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. Beard's grin widened. "Oh, we know all sorts of things about you, Sarah. We've been watching this place for a while now." Watching you, the others were standing now, forming a loose semicircle around the counter. I felt like a deer surrounded by wolves. "Wes," my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "Look," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble. Why don't you guys head out and we'll forget this whole thing? Okay?" Snake laughed, a harsh sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, we're not going anywhere, sweetheart. The fun's just getting started." I saw Beard's hand moving towards his jacket pocket, and panic surged through me without thinking. I grabbed the pot of hot coffee and hurled it at him. He howled in pain as the scalding liquid splashed across his face and chest. I didn't wait to see more. I vaulted over the counter and made a mad dash for the back office. I could hear them shouting, the sound of tables and chairs being overturned in their pursuit. My trembling hands fumbled with the office door lock just as I got it secured. A body slammed against the other side. "You shouldn't have done that." Sarah Beard's voice filled with rage. "Now we're going to have to teach you a lesson." I grabbed the phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. Please pick up 911. What's your emergency?" The sound of the operator's voice nearly made me SOB with relief. "Please help me," I gasped. "I'm at Mel's Diner off Highway 16. There are men here. They're trying to get to me. They're going to the line, went dead." I stared at the phone in horror, then looked up to see the cord dangling uselessly cut from outside the office. The pounding on the door was getting more intense. I could hear the wood splintering. It wouldn't hold for long, think. Sarah, think my eyes darted around the small office looking for anything I could use as a weapon. They landed on the small window near the ceiling, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. But it was my only shot. I dragged the desk over, using it as a makeshift ladder. The window was stuck, paint-sealed shut from years of disuse. I could hear the door beginning to give way as I struggled with the latch. With a final desperate shove, the window popped open. I pulled myself up, wiggling through the tight space. My shirt caught on a nail, tearing as I tumbled out onto the gravel behind the diner. The shock of the fall knocked the wind out of me, but fear gave me the strength to scramble to my feet. I could hear shouting from inside, knew it was only moments before they realized where I'd gone. I ran like I'd never run before. My lungs burning and my feet bleeding from the gravel. The highway stretched out before me, dark and empty. No cars in sight. The nearest town was miles away behind me. I heard the sound of the diner's back door slamming open. "There she is," Snake's voice carried on the night air. I veered off the road, plunging into the field beside it. The tall grass whipped at my face and arms as I crashed through it. I could hear them behind me, their heavy footsteps and labored breathing spurring me on. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Each second lasting an eternity. My legs felt like lead, my chest on fire, but I didn't dare stop. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I saw it, lights in the distance, a house, with a final burst of energy. I didn't know I had. I sprinted towards those lights behind me. I could hear my pursuers closer now. So close I reached the house, pounding on the door with all my might. "Help," I screamed. "Please, somebody help me." The porch light flicked on. I heard movement inside. "Please, please, please." The door opened, revealing an elderly man with a shotgun. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance. Clothes torn, bleeding. "Wildy with terror, please." I gasped. "They're after me. Help me." He didn't hesitate. He pulled me inside and slammed the door, locking it securely. "Martha," he called out. "Call the sheriff now." I collapsed on the floor, my body finally giving out. Through the window, I saw figures moving at the edge of the property, but they didn't approach. The sight of the old man's shotgun must have given them pause. What followed was a blur of police sirens, paramedics, and questions. Lots of questions. The men were caught a few days later trying to cross the state line. Turns out they were wanted for a string of assaults and murders across 3 states. I gave my statement, identified them in a lineup, and testified at their trial. But even seeing them LED away in handcuffs didn't erase the terror of that night. It's been 2 years since then. I don't work night shifts anymore, can't bring myself to be alone in the dark. I jump at shadows and loud noises. Every stranger is a potential threat, but I survived. I got away, and every day I remind myself of that. I'm not just a victim, I'm a survivor. And no matter how dark the night gets, I know now that I have the strength to make it through to the dawn. The first impact jolted me forward, my seatbelt cutting into my chest. The second one spun my car toward the guardrail as I fought to regain control. One thought blazed through my mind. This wasn't an accident. Someone was trying to run me off the road. It had started as a normal day. I was driving back from a business trip, a 6-hour journey I'd made countless times before the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, how peaceful that peace was about to be shattered in the most terrifying way. I'd been on the road for about 4 hours. The monotony of the highway, broken only by the occasional rest stop or small town traffic, had thinned out as night fell, leaving long stretches where I was alone on the road. I didn't mind. I'd always enjoyed the solitude of night. Driving. The first sign that something was wrong came when I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. They'd been there for a while, keeping pace with me. At first I didn't think much of it. It was a highway after all, but as the miles ticked by and the car behind me maintained the same distance, never passing despite the empty lanes, a sense of unease began to creep over me. I tapped my brake lights, thinking maybe they hadn't realized how close they were. The car behind me didn't slow down. Instead, it surged forward, closing the gap between us even more. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't normal. Highway behavior. I pressed down on the accelerator, putting some distance between us for a moment. I thought that would be the end of it. Then I saw the other car speed up, matching my pace once again. What the hell, I muttered. Glancing between the road ahead and my rearview mirror, the headlights behind me seemed to grow brighter, more menacing. With each passing second, I considered pulling over, but something told me that would be a mistake. Whoever was behind me didn't have good intentions. My best bet was to try to lose them or find a populated area. I pressed harder on the gas, pushing my car to speeds I'd never attempted before. The engine whined in protest, but I didn't let up. In my mirror, I saw the other car accelerate too, staying right on my tail. My hands were sweating now, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I weaved between lanes, hoping to shake them off. They matched my movements perfectly, like we were connected by an invisible tether. That's when the first impact came, a hard slam to my rear bumper that sent my car fishtailing. I managed to straighten out, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Okay, I said out loud, trying to calm myself. Okay, this is happening. Think, what do I do? I fumbled for my phone with one hand, keeping the other firmly on the wheel. No signal, of course. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest on both sides of the highway. The next hit came from the side. The other car had pulled up alongside me and swerved, slamming into my passenger door. The impact sent me spinning towards the guardrail. I yanked the wheel hard, barely managing to keep the car on the road. Adrenaline surged through me. This wasn't just road rage. This was attempted murder. I spotted an exit ahead. Without thinking, I cut across 2 lanes and took it, tires screeching in protest. The car behind me followed, but the sudden move had put some distance between us. The exit led to a narrow, winding road. Under normal circumstances, I would never have attempted it at this speed, but these were far from normal circumstances. I pushed my car to its limits, taking turns so sharply that I felt the wheels lift off the ground. In my mirror, I could see the other car struggling with the curves they were falling behind. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. That hope was short-lived. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, my headlights illuminated a sight that made my blood run cold. The road ahead was blocked by a fallen tree. I slammed on the brakes, feeling the car skid on the loose gravel. Time seemed to slow down. I could see the tree getting closer, could hear the screech of tires behind me. In that moment, I was certain I was about to die. At the last possible second, I yanked the wheel to the side. My car left the road, plowing into the underbrush branches, whipped at the windshield as I bounced and jolted through the forest. Finally, mercifully, I came to a stop for a moment. All I could do was sit there, my hands still clenched on the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was alive. Somehow, I was alive. The sound of an engine revving snapped me back to reality. They were still out there, still hunting me. I killed my headlights and slumped down in my seat, praying the thick foliage would hide me. I heard the other car slow down, then stop. A car door opened and closed. Footsteps crunched on gravel coming closer. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth. I held my breath, not daring to move a muscle. The footsteps paused near my hiding spot. The light danced over the leaves just inches from my car. Come out wherever you are. A voice called, sickeningly playful, "You can't hide forever." I stayed frozen, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they must be able to hear it. The footsteps moved away, then came back. This game of cat and mouse seemed to last for hours, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, I heard a frustrated grunt. Damn it, lost them. The footsteps retreated, a car door slammed, and an engine roared to life. I heard tires squealing as they sped away, even after the sound had faded completely. I didn't move. I was terrified it was another trick, that they were waiting for me to reveal myself as the adrenaline wore off. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was stranded in the middle of a forest, my car likely damaged. Beyond driving Shaw with a murderous maniac potentially still in the area, and I still had no cell signal. I allowed myself a moment of panic, a few ragged sobs escaping before I clamped down on my emotions. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Now I needed a plan. Staying with the car seemed risky. If they came back and searched more thoroughly, I'd be a sitting duck, but striking out into the forest at night with no idea where I was or which direction to go seemed equally dangerous in the end. Survival instinct won out. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and a small flashlight I kept in the glove compartment, taking a deep breath. I opened the car door as quietly as I could and stepped out into the darkness. The forest was alive with sounds. The rustle of leaves, the calls of night birds, the scurrying of small animals. Every noise made me jump, certain it was my pursuer returning. I picked a direction and started walking. Trying to move as silently as possible, I didn't dare use the flashlight. Relying instead on the faint moonlight filling through the trees, I walked for what felt like hours, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Every shadow looked like a lurking figure. Every snapping twig sounded like a footstep behind me. Just when I was about to give up hope, to curl up on the forest floor and wait for whatever fate had in store for me, I saw a light in the distance. Faint but unmistakably man-made new energy flooded through me. I pushed forward, ignoring the scratches from branches and the ache in my legs. As I got closer, I could make out a small cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney and warm light spilled from the windows. I burst out of the tree line, probably looking like a wild man. An old couple was sitting on the porch enjoying the night air. They jumped up in alarm at my sudden appearance. "Please," I gasped, my voice hoarse, "please help me. Someone's trying to kill me." What followed was a blur of police sirens, paramedics, and questions. Lots of questions. They never caught the person who ran me off the road. The car was found abandoned a few miles away, reported stolen from a town I'd passed through earlier that day. In the weeks and months that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Why me? Was it random, or had I been specifically targeted? The not knowing was almost worse than the attack itself. I couldn't bring myself to drive for a long time. After that, even now, years later, I get nervous on long road trips. I'm always checking my rearview mirror, always aware of the cars around me, but I survived. I outsmarted them, outlasted them, and every day I remind myself of that. I'm not just a victim, I'm a survivor. And no matter how dark the road gets, I know now that I have the strength to make it through to the other side. The first photograph arrived on a Tuesday, an innocuous envelope. No return address, containing a single Polaroid of me sleeping in my bed. That's when I realized the house I was watching wasn't empty after all. Someone was watching me back. I never thought house sitting could be dangerous. It was supposed to be an easy gig, a chance to get away from my cramped city apartment and enjoy some peace and quiet. In the countryside, my college friend Jake had inherited this sprawling Victorian mansion from his grandmother, and he needed someone to look after it while he sorted out the estate. "It'll be great," Jake had said, handing me the keys. Total solitude, beautiful views, and hey, maybe you'll finally finish that novel you've been talking about for years. I jumped at the chance. A month in a picturesque country house with nothing to do but write and relax. It sounded like paradise. The first week was everything I'd hoped for. I settled into a comfortable routine, writing in the mornings, exploring the extensive grounds in the afternoons, and spending my evenings curled up by the fireplace with a good book. The house was full of charming quirks: creaky floorboards, doors that didn't quite close right, windows that rattled in the wind. But but that was part of its charm. It was on the eighth night that I first heard it. A soft thud from somewhere upstairs, like something being knocked over. I froze my book, forgotten in my lap, straining to listen for a long moment. There was nothing but silence, then unmistakably the sound of footsteps. My heart began to race. I was alone in the house, or at least I was supposed to be. Jake had assured me that no one else had keys, that the place would be all mine. For the month, I grabbed the fireplace poker, the only weapon-like object within reach, and crept towards the stairs. The old wood creaked under my feet, each sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response, just the oppressive silence of the big unempty house. I climbed the stairs slowly, the poker clutched tightly in my sweating hands. At the top, I paused, listening. Nothing. I checked each room carefully, flicking on lights, looking under beds and in closets. Everything was exactly as it should be, no sign of an intruder. I laughed nervously, feeling a bit foolish. It was probably just the house settling, I told myself. Old buildings make all sorts of noises. I was letting my imagination run wild. But as I climbed back into bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. The next few days passed uneventfully. I threw myself into my writing, trying to ignore the lingering unease that had settled over me, but I found myself jumping at every creak and groan of the house, constantly looking over my shoulder. Then came the photograph. I found the envelope tucked halfway under the front door when I went to get the mail. No stamp, no return address. Just my name scrolled across the front in messy handwriting. Inside was a single puad. The image was dark, grainy, but unmistakable. It showed me asleep in bed, taken from the doorway of the bedroom. My blood ran cold. This wasn't my imagination. Someone had been in the house. Someone had been in my room while I slept. With shaking hands, I called Jake. "Are you sure no one else has access to the house?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice positive. Jake replied, "Grams was pretty paranoid in her old age. She changed all the locks before she died. I'm the only one with keys, and I gave the only copy to you." I wanted to believe him, but the photograph in my hand said otherwise. That night, I double and triple checked every door and window before going to bed. I pushed a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door and slept with the fireplace poker next to me, but sleep didn't come easily. Every noise, every shadow seemed sinister. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake at the slightest sound. The next morning, I found another envelope. This time the photo showed me at my laptop, writing it had been taken through the study window. I called the local police, but they were skeptical. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. They suggested it might be a prank. Maybe by some local kids. They promised to increase patrols in the area, but didn't seem overly concerned. I knew it wasn't a prank. The photos kept coming, one every day. Me reading in the library, me making dinner in the kitchen, me standing at the bedroom window looking out at the night. I became a prisoner in the house, keeping all the curtains drawn, jumping at every sound. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even in the most private moments, I begged Jake to let me leave to find someone else to watch the house. But he was in Europe dealing with legal issues related to the estate. He promised he'd be back as soon as he could, but it would be at least another week. So I stayed my nerves, fraying more with each passing day. I set up makeshift alarms, cans on strings by the doors and windows, anything that would make noise if disturbed. I slept in short bursts, never more than an hour at a time. It was during one of these fitful naps that I heard it. The soft click of a camera shutter, my eyes flew open, but I forced myself to remain still to keep my breathing even. There in the darkness, I saw a shape, a figure standing in the doorway of my room. Terror paralyzed me. I wanted to scream to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I lay there, heart pounding, as the figure raised the camera again. Click, the sound galvanized me into action. I leapt from the bed, swinging the fireplace poker wildly. The figure dodged inhumanly fast and darted out of the room. I gave chase my fear, turning to rage. Enough was enough. I was going to end this one way or another. The intruder was quick, but I knew the layout of the house better. I heard them stumble on the stairs, and I pressed my advantage. As we reached the ground floor, I managed to corner them in the library. "Who are you?" I demanded, brandishing the poker. "What do you want from me?" The figure turned, and in the dim light filtering through the curtains, I caught my first clear glimpse of my tormentor. It was a woman, probably in her 60s, with wild gray hair and eyes that burned with an unsettling intensity. "This is my house," she hissed. "You don't belong here. None of you belong here." Recognition dawned. The old photos I'd seen around the house, the ones Jake had said were of his grandmother. "You're Margaret," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Jake's grandmother, but you're supposed to be dead." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Dead is that, what they told you. They tried to get rid of me, to lock me away, said I was crazy, but I showed them I hid. I waited. This is my house, mine." My mind was reeling. Jake had lied. His grandmother wasn't dead. She was very much alive and clearly not in her right mind. "Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm not here to take your house. I'm just watching it for Jake, for your grandson, Liar." She shrieked. "You're all liars. You want to steal my home just like they did. But I won't let you. I'll drive you out just like all the others." She lunged at me, surprisingly spry for her age. I dodged, but she managed to knock the poker from my hand. We grappled, crashing into bookshelves and furniture. Despite her age, Margaret was strong, fueled by madness and desperation. But I was younger, and fear gave me strength I didn't know I had. Finally, I managed to pin her down. She struggled and cursed, but I held on. "I'm sorry," I panted. "I'm so sorry, but this has to end." I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me restraining her as she alternately screamed threats and pleaded to be let go. Eventually, exhaustion took over and she fell into a fitful sleep with shaking hands. I called the police. Then I called Jake. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and paramedics. Margaret was taken away, still ranting about the house being hers. Jake arrived looking shell-shocked and guilty. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I never thought we all believed she was dead. The nursing home said she'd passed in her sleep. We had a funeral and everything." The truth came out in bits and pieces. Margaret had indeed been in a nursing home, diagnosed with severe paranoid delusions. She'd faked her own death somehow and made her way back to the house she'd been living in the walls, in hidden rooms that even Jake didn't know about, watching and waiting. I left that day still shaken by the ordeal. Jake offered compensation, profuse apologies, but I just wanted to put it all behind me. It's been years, but I still have nightmares, sometimes dreams, where I'm being watched, where shadows move in the corners of my vision. I've never housed it again, never stayed anywhere alone, because now I know that sometimes the thing you fear most isn't what might be hiding in the darkness. Sometimes the real terror comes from realizing that the monster has been there all along, watching and waiting in the very place you thought was safe. The first footprint appeared in the sand just outside our bedroom window. By morning, there was a complete circle around the beach house. That's when I realized our romantic getaway had become a fight for survival. Sarah and I had been looking forward to this vacation for months. Both of us were buried in high-stress jobs in the city, and the idea of a week alone in a secluded beach house seemed like paradise. No phones, no internet, just us, and the sound of the waves. We arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun already sinking towards the horizon, painting. The sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The beach house was everything the pictures had promised. a charming two-story cottage with weathered blue shutters and a wraparound porch that looked out over the dunes. It's perfect. Sarah breathed, her eyes shining as she took in the view. I had to agree the nearest neighbor was a good half-mile down the beach in either direction. We had our own little slice of heaven. We spent that first evening unpacking, exploring the house, and walking along the beach as the stars came out. The sound of the waves and the salty sea air worked their magic, and for the first time in months, I felt the tension begin to leave my body. We fell asleep to the rhythm of the surf, tangled in each other's arms, looking forward to a week of uninterrupted bliss. I woke before dawn, a lifetime habit that even vacation couldn't break. Not wanting to disturb Sarah, I slipped out of bed and made my way downstairs to start the sea. As I waited for the pot to brew, I wandered over to the window drawn by the pre-dawn light silvering the waves. That's when I saw a single footprint in the sand just below our bedroom window. My first thought was that it must be one of ours from the night before, but as I looked closer, I realized it was much larger than either Sarah's foot or mine, and it was facing the house, not away from it. A chill ran down my spine. Despite the warm morning air, I quickly made my way outside, wanting to investigate further before the tide came in and washed away any evidence. What I found made my blood run cold. The single footprint wasn't alone. There was a complete circle of them around the entire house, as if someone or something had paced around our bedroom all night long. I stood there frozen, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. See, it had to be a prank. Right, maybe some local kids messing with the tourists, but how had they managed to leave footprints in the soft sand without disturbing any other part of the beach? And why circle the house instead of just leaving a few random prints? Jack, what are you doing out here? Sarah's voice snapped me out of my daze. She stood on the porch wrapped in a robe, a quizzical expression on her face for a moment. I considered not telling her why ruin our vacation over what was probably just a stupid prank. But as I opened my mouth to make up some excuse, I realized I couldn't lie to her. Not about this. Sarah, come look at this, I said, gesturing to the footprints. Tell me I'm not going crazy. She came down the steps, her bare feet leaving delicate imprints next to the much larger, more ominous ones as she took in the circle of footprints. Her face paled. What is this? She whispered. I don't know. I admitted, but I don't like it. We spent the next hour combing the beach looking for any other signs of intrusion, but there was nothing. No other footprints leading to or from the circle, no disturbed sand anywhere else. It was as if whoever had made the prints had materialized, out of thin air, walked around our house, and then vanished. Maybe we should call the police, Sarah suggested as we made our way back to the house. I nodded. Though I wasn't sure what we'd tell them, we had no evidence of any actual crime, just some weird footprints that would probably be gone with the next high tide. But when I tried to use the landline in the house, all I got was static. My cell phone showed no signal. We were cut off. It's probably just the storm, I said. Nodding towards the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the repairman will be out once it passes. Sarah nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. It mirrored my own unease. We tried to go about our day as planned, but the carefree mood of the previous evening was gone. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat as night fell and the storm rolled in. The tension in the house was palpable. We double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains. But it did little to ease our fears. Maybe we should leave, Sarah said as we lay in bed, neither of us able to sleep. First thing in the morning, we'll drive back to the city. I agreed, though the thought of admitting defeat so early in our vacation stung my pride, but better safe than sorry. Right, a crack of thunder made us both jump. The storm was directly overhead now, rain lashing against the windows in the brief flashes of light. Lightning, the bedroom took on an eerie, unfamiliar quality. That's when we heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A slow, deliberate scraping noise coming from downstairs. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing tight. Jack, she whispered, her voice trembling. There's someone in the house. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, that it was just the wind, but I'd heard it too, and now that we were listening, really listening, I could hear something else. footsteps heavy and slow moving through the house below us. My mind raced. The baseball bat I'd seen in the closet downstairs was too far away. The best weapon I could reach was the heavy lamp on the bedside table. "Stay here," I whispered to Sarah. "Lock the door behind me. If you hear anything bad, run. Don't wait for me. Just run." She shook her head frantically, clinging to my arm. "No, don't leave me." Another boom of thunder, and in that moment the power went out. The room plunged into total darkness. The footsteps downstairs paused, then began to move again, this time unmistakably towards the stairs in the pitch black. I fumbled for the lamp, yanking it free from the wall. Sarah was breathing fast and shallow beside me, her fear palpable in the darkness. The stairs creaked one by one, slow, methodical. Whatever was down there, it wasn't trying to hide its approach. I stood positioning myself between the bed and the door. My palms were sweaty on the base of the lamp, but I gripped it tightly, ready to swing at anything that came through that door. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They paused as if considering which way to go. Then, with dreadful inevitability, they started moving towards our room. I could hear Sarah behind me, whispering what sounded like a prayer. The doorknob began to turn slowly, so slowly in that moment survival instinct took over. I lunged forward, swinging the lamp with all my might. Just as the door began to open, there was a sickening thud and a cry of pain. Something heavy fell to the floor without thinking. I grabbed Sarah's hand and bolted for the door, leaping over the prone figure in the doorway. We ran blindly down the stairs, our only guide, the flashes of lightning. Through the windows behind us, I could hear movement, a low growl that sounded more animal than human. We burst out of the front door into the raging storm. Rain lashed at us, the wind nearly knocking us off our feet, but we didn't stop. We ran down the beach, the wet sand sucking at our feet, making every step a struggle. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. The storm raged around us and behind us. I didn't dare look back to see if we were being followed. Finally, we saw lights in the distance. The next house down the beach. We stumbled towards it, our last reserves of energy draining away the owners. An elderly couple were alarmed to find two soaked-on, terrified strangers pounding on their door in the middle of a storm. But they let us in, gave us blankets, and called the police. By the time the storm cleared and the police were able to check out our rental, there was no sign of an intruder, no footprints in the sand, no evidence of a break-in. Even the lamp was back on the bedside table, though I know I'd swung it at something. The official report chalked it up to an overactive imagination and the effects of the storm. But Sarah and I know what we experienced. We know what we heard, what we saw. We never went back to that beach house. Never took another secluded vacation these days. We stick to crowded resorts and busy cities because we learned the hard way that sometimes isolation isn't peaceful, sometimes it's deadly, and sometimes the footprints in the sand are trying to tell you something, a warning that you're not as alone as you think you are. The Ferris wheel creaked to life, its rusted gears groaning in protest as the cart I was hiding in began to rise. I realized with growing horror that I wasn't the one who had turned it on. Someone else was in the abandoned amusement park with me, and they knew exactly where I was. My name's Mike, and I've been working as a night security guard at the old Wonderland amusement park for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills. Plus, there's something eerily beautiful about an abandoned amusement park at night. The silent rides, the faded paint, the empty pathways. It's like stepping into a forgotten world. Most nights, my biggest excitement is chasing away the occasional group of teenagers looking for a spooky thrill. But tonight was different. It started like any other shift. I arrived just as the sun was setting. Leaving the day guard and settling in for a long night of patrols and paperwork. The first few hours were uneventful. I made my rounds, checking the perimeter fences and making sure all the buildings were secure. It was around midnight when I first noticed something was off. I was doing my second walkthrough of the park when I saw a flicker of movement. Out of the corner of my eye, I turned quickly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the silent looming shapes of the rides. I tried to shake it off. Old amusement parks make all sorts of noises as they settle. It was probably just a rat or a stray cat, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched as I continued my patrol. The feeling grew stronger. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking figure. Every creak and groan of the old structure set my nerves on edge. I found myself walking faster, my hand resting on the taser at my hip. I was near the old carousel when I heard it. A laugh, high and manic, it echoed through the empty park. I spun around, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is private property. Show yourself silence." Then another laugh, this time from a different direction. It was like they were toying with me, leading me on a TW twisted game of cat and mouse. I radioed for backup, but all I got was static. My cell phone showed no signal. I was on my own against my better judgment. I decided to investigate. I followed the sound of the laughter, my flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I moved. It led me deeper into the park, past the dilapidated food stalls and towards the towering silhouette of the Ferris wheel. As I approached, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The control panel for the Ferris wheel was open, wires exposed. Someone had been tampering with it before I could process what this meant. I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled around, but my flashlight beam met only empty air. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from all directions at once. Panic surged through me. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran for the nearest hiding spot, one of the Ferris wheel carts I climbed in. Crouching down low, and waited. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped for a long moment. There was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, without warning, the Ferris wheel lurched into motion. Terror gripped me as my cart began to rise. Whoever was out there knew exactly where I was, and they were playing with me like a cat with a mouse. As I reached the top of the wheel's rotation, the ride ground to a halt. I was suspended high above the park. Trapped and exposed from this vantage point, I could see figures moving in the shadows below. Not one, but several. They were spreading out, covering all possible escape routes. My mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want? I thought about the strange occurrences over the past few weeks. Equipment going missing. Odd noises during the night shift, unexplained power out of ages. Had it all been leading up to this? A voice called out from below, amplified by some kind of speaker system. "Welcome, Mike, to tonight's special performance. We hope you're enjoying the view." I recognized that voice. It belonged to Jake, one of the day shift guards, but why would he be doing this? "What's going on, Jake?" I shouted back, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "What is this?" A chorus of laughter answered me. "Oh, Mike." Jake's voice responded, dripping with mock sympathy. "You really have no idea, do you? Did you think this was just some rundown amusement park, that you were here to guard against vandals and thrill-seeking teens?" My mind was reeling. What was he talking about? "This park sits on something valuable, Mike. Something a lot of people would kill for, and you've been an unwitting guard dog, keeping away anyone who might discover our little operation." Realization dawned on me. The odd shipments that arrived in the dead of night. The areas of the park, I was told, were structurally unsound and off limits. They'd been using the abandoned park as a cover for something illegal. Drugs, weapons, I didn't know, but I was certain I wasn't meant to leave here alive now that I'd seen too much. Now, Jake continued, "We could just kill you, but where's the fun in that? We've prepared some games for you, Mike. If you survive them, maybe we'll let you join our little family. If not, well, accidents happen in old amusement parks all the time, don't they?" The Ferris wheel groaned back to life. Lowering my cart to the ground as soon as it was low enough, I leaped out, my legs nearly buckling as I hit the ground. I could hear them coming for me, their footsteps and laughter echoing through the park. What followed was the most terrifying night of my life. They had rigged the entire park into a deadly playground. Rides sprung to life as I passed, nearly crushing me. Tripwires sent me tumbling, barely avoiding rusted spikes. At one point, I found myself in the old house of mirrors, surrounded by distorted reflections of my pursuers, unable to tell which were real and which were illusions. But I had one advantage they didn't count on. I knew this park better than anyone. 6 months of night patrols had burned every pathway, every hiding spot into my memory. I used that knowledge to stay one step ahead, doubling back and using maintenance tunnels to throw them off my trail. As the night wore on, I could sense their frustration growing. Their taunts became angrier, their traps more reckless. I managed to turn some of their own tricks against them, leading one of them into a snare they'd set for me. Finally, as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I made it to the perimeter fence. I could hear them closing in behind me, Jake's voice growing hoarse as he shouted orders to the others with the last of my strength. I climbed the fence, the rusted metal cutting into my hands. I dropped down on the other side. Just as they reached the fence, Jake's face contorted with rage. Was the last thing I saw as I ran towards the highway. I flagged down the first car I saw, probably looking like a madman with my torn clothes and wild eyes. The elderly couple inside were reluctant to stop at first, but something in my desperate expression must have convinced them. They drove me straight to the police station. What followed was a whirlwind of police statements, FBI investigations, and media frenzy. It turned out the park had been used as a front for a major drug trafficking operation. Jake and his crew were arrested along with several high-ranking officials who had been on the take. I was hailed as a hero, offered commendations and job opportunities, but all I could think about was how close I'd come to dying in that park, how a mundane night shift had turned into a fight for survival. These days I work as a security consultant helping design systems to prevent the kind of infiltration that happened at Wonderland, but I'll never forget that night. Sometimes in my dreams, I'm back on that Ferris wheel suspended above a dark playground of terror, and I wonder if the sun hadn't risen when it did, would I have made it out alive? One thing's for certain, I'll never look at an amusement park the same way again behind the cheerful music and colorful lights. I now know that sometimes the real horrors are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the sun to go down and the games to begin. The moment I saw the strange symbol carved into my bedroom door, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just a quaint small-town bed and breakfast, it was the heart of something far more sinister, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. I hadn't planned on stopping in Millbrook. It was supposed to be a quick road trip to visit my sister in the next state over, but a combination of bad weather, worse traffic, and a car that decided to start making ominous noises forced me to reconsider my no-stop policy. As I pulled into the town, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the picturesque Main Street. Millbrook looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, all quaint storefronts and friendly faces. It was almost too perfect, but I was too tired to care. The Millbrook Inn stood at the end of the street, a Victorian-style house with a wide porch and cheerful flower boxes. A sign in the window proclaimed vacancy, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The woman who greeted me at the door looked like everyone's ideal grandmother. Silver hair and a neat bun, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an apron dusted with flour. "Welcome to Millbrook, dear," she said, her smile warm and inviting. "I'm Martha. You look like you could use a hot meal and a soft bed." I couldn't argue with that as Martha led me to my room, chattering about the town's history and the weather. I found myself relaxing for the first time in hours. The room was cozy with a four-poster bed and antique furnishings. It smelled of lavender and fresh linens dinners. At 7 in the main dining room, Martha said as she handed me the key, "Don't be late, we've got a special roast tonight." I thanked her and settled in, taking a quick shower before heading down to dinner. The dining room was full when I arrived, other guests and what seemed to be some locals all seated around a large table. Martha's husband, George, was at the head, carving a roast that smelled divine. As I took my seat, I noticed something odd. Everyone at the table was wearing the same pendant, a small silver disc with a strange symbol etched into it. I assumed it must be some local tradition and thought nothing more of it. The conversation flowed easily, everyone curious about the newcomer in town. They asked about my journey, my destination. My life back home, I found myself sharing more than I usually would with strangers drawn in by their seemingly genuine interest. It wasn't until I was halfway through my second helping of roast that I realized no one had touched their own plates. They were all watching me eat with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Is everything okay?" I asked, lowering my fork. Martha laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, dear. We're just so glad you're enjoying the meal. It's not often we get visitors in Millbrook. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I found myself growing drowsy, my limbs heavy. I blamed it on the long day of driving and the hearty meal excusing myself to head to bed early as I climbed the stairs. The world seemed to tilt and sway. I stumbled into my room, barely managing to lock the door before collapsing onto the bed. As consciousness slipped away, I had a fleeting thought that something wasn't right. But before I could grasp it, darkness took me. I woke with a start, disoriented and groggy. The room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight cut through the curtains. Illuminating something that hadn't been there before, carved into the wooden door, was the same symbol I'd seen on the pendants at dinner, fully awake. Now I scrambled out of bed, my head was pounding, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton drugged. I realized with growing horror they drugged me at dinner. I tried the door, but it was locked from the outside. The window was my next option, but when I pulled back the curtains, I found it boarded up. I was trapped. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I needed to think to find a way out. I searched the room for anything I could use as a weapon or tool, but came up empty. Whoever had prepared this room had done a thorough job of removing anything useful. As I stood there trying to come up with a plan, I heard it chanting low and rhythmic coming from somewhere below. I pressed my ear to the floor, straining to make out the words. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a language that sounded ancient and somehow wrong. The chanting grew louder, and with it came the sound of footsteps on the stairs. My heart raced as I looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere I was cornered. The lock clicked and the door swung open. Martha stood there, but she was hardly recognizable as the kindly innkeeper from earlier. Her eyes gleamed with a fanatical light, and her smile was predatory. "It's time, my dear," she said, her voice oddly resonant. "The sleeping god awaits his sacrifice." Two men appeared behind her, grabbing my arms before I could react. I struggled, but whatever they had drugged me with left me weak and uncoordinated. They dragged me from the room and down the stairs. The main room of the inn had been transformed. The furniture was pushed to the walls, and in the center was a large stone altar that I was certain hadn't been there before. The other dinner guests stood around it, all wearing hooded robes, their pendants glowing with an eerie light as they forced me towards the altar. My mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life any moment. Now I'd wake up and realize this was all a bizarre dream brought on by bad road food, but the cold stone against my back as they laid me on the altar was all too real. The chanting grew louder, and I could feel a vibration in the air, a building pressure that made my ears pop. George approached, holding an ornate dagger. His eyes were completely black. Reflecting no light for centuries, we have kept the faith. He intoned, "For centuries we have fed the sleeping god, keeping him appeased, keeping him sleeping. And now with your sacrifice we ensure another century of peace." I wanted to scream, to beg to reason with them, but no sound would come out. I was paralyzed, whether from fear or whatever drug they had given me. I couldn't tell. George raised the dagger, the blade catching the candlelight in that moment as I stared death in the face. Something inside me snapped with strength, born of desperation. I wrenched my arm free and grabbed the pendant from around George's neck the moment my fingers closed around it. A shock went through my body. The pendant burned white hot and a scream tore from my throat. But it wasn't my voice. It was something older, something terrifying. The cultists fell back, their faces masks of terror. The pressure in the room built to an unbearable level, and then with a sound like reality itself. Tearing, everything went black. I came to on the side of the road. Miles outside of Millbrook, my car was there, running smoothly as if it had never had a problem. There was no sign of the town, no sign of the cult, no sign that any of it had ever happened. But clutched in my hand, the silver pendant remained. And sometimes late at night I can still hear the chanting. I never told anyone what happened in Millbrook who would believe me. I threw away the pendant, moved to a new city, tried to forget. But I know the truth now. I know that behind some small towns, picture-perfect facades, ancient horrors slumber, and sometimes they wake up hungry, I don't take road trips anymore. I don't stop in small towns, and I never ever stay at bed and breakfast because you never know when you might find yourself on the menu. The first shadow darted across my peripheral vision, quick and silent. The second one made my heart race by the time I saw the third. I knew with chilling certainty that this wasn't just a shortcut through an unfamiliar neighborhood, it was a trap, and I had walked right into it. I'd never been one to shy away from adventure as a freelance photographer. I often found myself in strange places at odd hours chasing the perfect shot. That night was supposed to be no different. I was in a new city for a job, and I'd heard about a great spot to capture the skyline at sunset. The locals I'd asked for directions had warned me it was in a rough part of town, but I brushed off their concerns. I'd been in plenty of sketchy areas before and always managed just fine. The sun was already dipping below the horizon as I made my way through the maze of narrow streets. The fading light cast long shadows, turning familiar objects into looming sinister shapes. I clutched my camera bag closer, more out of habit than actual concern. It wasn't until I turned down a particularly narrow alley that I first felt it, that prickle on the back of your neck when you know you're being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but the alley behind me was empty, shaking off the feeling I pressed on. That's when I saw the first shadow, just a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision, gone so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost, I picked up my pace, my eyes darting from side to side, searching for the source of that fleeting shadow. The buildings loomed over me, their blank windows like dead eyes staring down the graffiti-covered walls seemed to close in, making the alley feel more like a tunnel with each step. The second shadow moved with more purpose, a dark figure that slipped from one doorway to another just ahead of me. My heart began to race, and I felt the first real stirrings of fear. This was no trick of the light or figment of an overactive imagination. Someone was out there and they were tracking my movements. I turned around, intent on heading back the way I came, only to see a third shadow detach itself from a darkened alcove. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was being herded. My walk turned into a jog, then a run. I could hear footsteps now, multiple sets echoing off the walls around me. They were coming from all directions, getting closer with each passing second. I took random turns, hoping to throw off my pursuers, but every new alley looked the same as the last, narrow, dirty, and full of potential hiding spots for those hunting me. My lungs burned and the camera bag slapped against my side with each frantic stride. As I rounded another corner, I saw a chain-link fence blocking the way. Beyond it, I could see a main street cars passing by, oblivious to the drama unfolding in these back alleys. Safety was so close, yet impossibly far. I reached the fence and began to climb the metal links biting into my hands. I was halfway up when I felt a hand grab my ankle, yanking me back down. I kicked out blindly, heard a grunt of pain, and the grip loosened. I scrambled up and over, dropping heavily on the other side, but my pursuers weren't giving up that easily. I could hear them scaling the fence behind me as I sprinted towards the main street. My only hope was to reach those cars, those people, before they caught up. I burst out onto the sidewalk, gasping for breath, wild-eyed and disheveled. A few pedestrians gave me startled looks, but no one stopped to help. I spun around, expecting to see my attackers emerging from the alley, but there was no one there. It was as if they'd vanished. Into thin air for a moment, I stood there, my heart pounding, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, but the scratches on my hands from the fence and the ache in my ankle where I'd been grabbed were very real. A police car cruised by and I flagged it down. Relief flooding through me, the officers listened to my story with skeptical expressions, but they agreed to take a look around the area. They found nothing, no suspicious characters, no signs of anyone lurking in the alleys, probably just some kids messing around. One of the officers suggested, "This area can get a bit rough after dark. You shouldn't be wandering around here alone." I nodded, not having the energy to argue. They offered me a ride back to my hotel, which I gratefully accepted as we drove away. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still watching me from the shadows back in my room. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it really had just been some local teens trying to scare a tourist. Maybe I'd let my imagination run wild in an unfamiliar place. But deep down, I knew it had been more than that. The coordination, the silence, the way they had herded me so effectively, this was no random encounter. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every noise from the hallway, every passing car outside made me jump. I kept replaying the chase in my mind, second guessing every decision I'd made. Should I have taken a different route? Should I have stayed on main streets? Should I have listened to the warnings about that part of town the next morning? Against my better judgment, I went back in the harsh light of day. The area looked different, less menacing, more rundown. I retracked my steps, camera in hand this time, looking for evidence of what had happened rather than the perfect shot. I found nothing conclusive, just some scuff marks on the fence where I'd climbed over, but as I was about to leave, something caught my eye. There, spray painted on a wall, partially hidden behind a dumpster, was a symbol, a stylized eye inside a triangle. It meant nothing to me, but it sent a chill down my spine. Nonetheless, I snapped a photo of the symbol and left quickly. Feeling exposed in the daylight back at my hotel, I spent hours researching, trying to find any meaning behind the symbol. My search led me down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and urban legends, stories of shadowy organizations that controlled cities, from the underground of initiation rites that involved hunting humans through urban labyrinths. Most of it was clearly nonsense, but some details resonated uncomfortably with my experience. The coordinated pursuit, the sudden disappearance when witnesses appeared. The marking left behind, it was all too similar to some of the stories I read. I never did get that skyline shot. I finished my assignment with safe and boring photos taken in well-lit populated areas, and as soon as the job was done, I left the city looking over my shoulder the entire way to the airport. In the years since I've become more cautious in my work, I stick to main roads, well-populated areas. I don't go out alone at night in unfamiliar places. Some might call it paranoia, but I call it survival. But sometimes late at night, when I'm editing photos, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the background of a shot, a shadow where there shouldn't be one, a figure just out of focus, and I'll remember that night running through those alleys, the sound of footsteps echoing all around me. I don't know who they were or what they wanted. I don't know if I was targeted specifically or if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I do know this: there are parts of our cities that don't appear on any map. There are people who move in the shadows unseen by those who live in the light, and sometimes if you're not careful, you might find yourself in their world. So the next time you're in an unfamiliar place and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that sense that you're being watched, don't ignore it, don't try to rationalize it away. Run as fast as you can towards the light, towards people, towards safety, because you never know when a simple shortcut might turn into something far more dangerous. And if you ever see that symbol, that eye in the triangle, turn around, go back the way you came. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some worlds better left unexplored, because once you've glimpsed what lurks in the shadows, you can never truly return to the light. The first gunshot echoed through the forest, sending birds scattering into the sky. The second one hit the tree next to me, showering bark across my face. That's when I realized this wasn't just illegal poaching, they were hunting me. My name's Sarah, and I've been a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Forest for the past 5 years. It's a job I love, being out in nature, protecting the wildlife, educating visitors about conservation, but nothing in my training could have prepared me for that day. It started like any other patrol. I was checking the northern sector, an area we'd been monitoring due to reports of possible poaching activity. The forest was quiet that morning, the air crisp with the first hint of autumn. I remember thinking how beautiful the sunlight looked filtering through the changing leaves. As I hiked deeper into the woods, I started noticing signs that something was off: broken branches, disturbed undergrowth marks that didn't fit with the usual animal tracks. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but I pushed on. It was my job to investigate after all. Then I saw a flash of metal in the underbrush. I approached cautiously, my heart racing as I pushed aside the ferns. I uncovered a trap, not just any trap, but a heavy-duty illegal snare designed to catch large game. This was serious. We'd had issues with poachers before, but never anything this sophisticated. I radioed back to base, reporting my find and requesting backup. But as I was describing the location, I heard voices in the distance quickly. I cut the transmission, not wanting to alert whoever was out there to my presence. Crouching low, I moved towards the sound. Two men came into view dressed in camouflage and carrying high-powered rifles. They were talking in low voices, discussing their haul for the day. From their conversation, I realized this wasn't just opportunistic poaching. This was an organized operation. I needed evidence slowly, carefully. I reached for my camera. If I could get some clear shots of their faces, their weapons, it would be enough for a solid case. I raised the camera, focused, and pressed the shutter. The click seemed deafening in the quiet forest. Both men whirled around, their rifles coming up. I froze, praying they hadn't seen me for a long moment. Nothing moved. Then one of them gestured silently and they began to move in my direction. I knew I had to get out of there as quietly as I could. I began to back away, but in my haste, I stepped on a dry branch. The snap might as well have been a gunshot over there. One of the men shouted. That's when the first shot rang out. I didn't wait to see if it was a warning or if they were aiming to kill. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I could hear them behind me shouting to each other as they gave chase. The second shot splintered the tree beside me, and I realized with a jolt of terror that they weren't trying to scare me off. They were shooting to kill. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but fear kept me going. I knew these woods better than they did. It was my only advantage. As I ran, my mind raced, trying to form a plan. The nearest ranger station was miles away. My radio was useless. This deep in the forest, I was on my own. I veered off the trail, heading towards a series of caves I knew were nearby. If I could reach them, maybe I could lose my pursuers in the maze. Like tunnels, the sound of a stream reached my ears and hope surged through me. The caves were just beyond it, but as I burst out of the tree line, my heart sank. The recent rains had SW swollen, the usually placid stream into a raging torrent. For a moment I hesitated. Trying to cross could be deadly, but the sound of voices behind me made the decision for me. I had to risk it. The water was ice cold and faster than I'd anticipated. I struggled against the current, my feet slipping on the smooth rocks. Halfway across, I lost my footing. The world tilted and suddenly I was underwater, tumbling helplessly in the churning rapids. I fought my way to the surface, gasping for air. Through water-blurred eyes, I saw the cave entrance rushing towards me with the last of my strength. I reached out and managed to grab onto a protruding rock. Hauling myself out of the water, I collapsed on the cave floor, shivering and coughing, but I couldn't rest. I could hear shouting from the other side of the stream. They were still coming. Stumbling to my feet, I plunged deeper into the cave. The darkness swallowed me, and I had to feel my way along the rough walls behind me. I heard splashing. They were crossing the stream. I moved faster, ignoring the scrapes and bruises as I bumped into unseen obstacles. The cave twisted and turned, branching off in multiple directions. I took random turns, hoping to lose them in the labyrinth, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. I found myself in a small chamber. Faint light filtered in from a crack in the ceiling. Illuminating a space face barely big enough to stand in it would have to do. I wedged myself into a crevice, trying to quiet my breathing, and I waited. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. I could hear them moving through the caves, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Sometimes they sounded far away, sometimes terrifyingly close. She has to be in here somewhere. One of them growled, his voice unnervingly near. We can't leave any witnesses, the other replied. Boss will have our heads if this operation gets blown. I pressed myself further into the crevice, hardly daring to breathe. A beam of light swept across the chamber as one of them passed by my hiding spot for a heart-stopping moment. I was sure he'd seen me, but the light moved on and their voices faded as they continued down another tunnel. I don't know how long I stayed there. Frozen in fear, it felt like days. Eventually the cave fell silent, but still, I waited, terrified it might be a trick. It wasn't until I saw the light changing, signaling the approach of dusk, that I finally dared to move. Every muscle screamed in protest as I uncurled from my hiding spot. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way back through the caves. The forest was quiet when I emerged. Painted in the golden hues of sunset, there was no sign of the poachers. Somehow miraculously, I'd outlasted them on shaky legs. I began the long trek back to the ranger station. It was fully dark by the time I stumbled. Out of the woods, probably looking like something out of a horror movie, soaked, covered in mud and scratches, wild-eyed with fear and exhaustion. My colleagues were shocked when I burst in, babbling about armed poachers and being hunted through the forest. They'd been about to send out a search party, worried when I hadn't checked in or returned from my patrol. The next few days were a blur of police statements, Park Service investigations, and my own debriefing. They found evidence of the poaching operation, hidden caches of weapons, more traps, even a makeshift processing camp deep in the woods. But of the men who chased me, there was no sign. They'd vanished like ghosts in the weeks that followed, as the investigation continued and security in the park was tightened. I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The forest I'd always seen as a sanctuary now felt threatening. Every shadow held potential danger, every unexpected sound sent my heart racing. But slowly, as the days passed and the nightmares began to fade, I found my fear turning to determination. These people had invaded my forest, threatened the animals I'd sworn to protect, and tried to kill me to cover their crimes. I wouldn't let them win by giving in to fear. I went back to work more vigilant than ever. I helped train other rangers on what to look for, how to spot signs of poaching activity. We implemented new safety protocols and improved our communication systems. Sometimes when I'm out on patrol, I'll catch myself scanning the trees, half expecting to see those camouflaged figures emerging from the underbrush. The sound of a twig snapping can still send my heart racing, but then I'll see a deer grazing peacefully in a meadow or watch a family of otter playing in the stream. And I'll remember why I do this job. The forest is still my home, still my responsibility, and no matter what dangers might be lurking out there, I'll keep protecting it. Because that's what being a ranger means. We stand as guardians between the wilderness and those who would exploit it. No matter the personal cost, so if you're ever hiking through Whispering Pines and you see a ranger watching the trees with an unusually keen eye, that might be me. I'm not just looking for lost hikers or rule breakers anymore. I'm watching for shadows that move against the wind, for flashes of metal where no metal should be, because I know now that sometimes the most dangerous predators in the forest walk on two legs, and I'll be damned if I let them hunt in my woods again. The engine of my rig had barely stopped rumbling when I saw them, three men emerging from the shadow, their eyes glinting with malice in the harsh glare of my headlights. In that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary pit stop. The supposedly abandoned rest area had just become a trap, and I was caught right in the middle of it. My name's Jake, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for that night. It had been a long haul carrying electronics from Chicago to Los Angeles. I was about halfway through Nevada, the endless desert stretching out on either side of the highway, when fatigue started to set in. The white lines on the road were beginning to blur, and I knew I needed to stop soon or risk falling asleep at the wheel. That's when I saw the sign for the rest area. It wasn't on my usual route, and something about it tickled the back of my mind, like I should have remembered something important. But exhaustion clouded my judgment, and the promise of a quick nap was too tempting to resist. The rest area looked abandoned when I pulled in, which wasn't unusual for this time of night. In such a remote location, the parking lot was empty, save for a beat-up pickup truck in the far corner. I figured it belonged to another weary traveler catching some shy. I maneuvered my rig into a spot, killed the engine, and let out a deep sigh. The sudden silence was almost deafening after hours of road noise. I was just about to climb into the sleeper cab when movement caught my eye. 3 men were approaching my truck. Fanning out as they came, they moved with purpose. Their stance suggesting this wasn't a friendly late-night chat. My hand instinctively went to the door lock, but I knew it wouldn't be much protection if they really wanted to get in. The leader, a tall man with a scraggly beard, stepped into the pool of light cast by my headlights. "Evening, driver," he called out, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of menace. "Looks like you could use some help." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. Thanks, but I'm all good, just stopping for a quick rest. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Oh, I insist, it's dangerous out here all alone. Why don't you come on out and join us? My mind raced. I was trapped in the cab, outnumbered and potentially outgunned. I couldn't drive off without risking running them over, which could land me in a world of legal trouble even if I managed to get away. I needed to buy time to figure out a way out of this mess. Look, fellas, I said I appreciate the offer, but I'm on a tight schedule. How about I just head on my way and we forget this ever happened? The leader, fake friendliness, dropped away. That's not how this works. Driver, you've got two choices: come out nice and easy, or we come in and get. You trust me you don't want the second option. I glanced at my phone, but as I expected, there was no signal. We were miles from anywhere, and no one knew I had stopped here. Help wasn't coming. Stalling for time, I asked, "What do you want from me?" The man to the left, a wiry guy with tattoos snaking up his neck, laughed. "What do we want? We want everything. Old man, that rig of yours is carrying some pretty valuable cargo, isn't it?" So that was it. They were hijackers, probably working with inside information. How else would they know what I was carrying? "Listen," I said, my mind working furiously, "that cargo is insured. The company won't lose anything if you take it. But if you let me go, I won't report this. You can take the truck and everything in it, and I'll hitch a ride to the next town. No one needs to get hurt." Here the leader seemed to consider this for a moment. Then he shook his head. "Nice try, but we can't take that risk. You've seen our faces. No, you're coming with us. We've got a nice cozy spot picked out where you can wait until this is all over." I knew what that meant. Once they had what they wanted, I'd be a loose end. These weren't the kind of men who left loose ends as they moved closer to the truck. I frantically looked around the cab for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on the CB radio. It was an older model, one I kept around more out of nostalgia than necessity. Most drivers these days relied on cell phones, but right now that old radio was my only hope. I lunged for it, hitting the power button and grabbing the mic. "Mayday, mayday," I shouted. "This is Bulldog. I'm at the abandoned rest stop off mile marker 237 under attack by hijackers. Any units in the area, please respond." The leader's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "You shouldn't have done that, old man," he growled, reaching into his jacket. I didn't wait to see what he was pulling out. I threw the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The rig lurched forward, forcing the men to dive out of the way as I pulled onto the highway. I heard a sharp crack and my side mirror exploded. They were shooting at me. I pushed the accelerator to the floor, praying the old girl had enough power to outrun them in my rearview mirror. I saw the pickup truck peel out of the rest area, its headlights quickly growing larger as it gained on me. My rig might have had power, but it was no match for a lighter, faster vehicle in terms of speed. I kept the CV mic in my hand, continuously broadcasting my position and the situation, but the radio remained ominously silent. Was anyone out there listening? The pickup was right on my tail. Now I saw the passenger lean out the window, something long and dark in his hands. Another shot rang out and I felt the truck shudder. They were aiming for my tires desperately. I began to weave back and forth across the highway, making myself a harder target. It worked, but it also slowed me down. They were getting closer just when I thought it was all over. I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Crackle over the CB. "This is Unit 17. Responding to your Mayday. What's your 20? Bulldog relief flooded through me. "I'm eastbound on 80, about 5 miles past mile marker 237. I've got a hostile vehicle in pursuit. Armed suspects 104. Bulldog, we've got units converging on your location. Can you keep evading?" Another shot rang out, this one punching through my cab and embedding itself in the dashboard. "Not for much longer," I replied, my voice tight. "Understood. There's a roadblock set up 2 miles ahead. When you see it, don't slow down. We'll clear a path for you." I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. 2 miles. I just had to make it 2 more miles. The pickup rammed me from behind the impact, jolting me in my seat. They were trying to run me off the road. I fought to keep the rig steady, using every bit of skill I'd gained in my years of driving. 1 mile to go. I could see flashing lights in the distance. The pickup rammed me again. Harder this time. The steering wheel bucked in my hands, and for a terrifying moment I thought I was going to lose control. 1/2 mile. The roadblock came into view, a line of patrol cars stretching across the highway at the last second. Two cars in the center pulled apart, leaving a gap just wide enough for my rig. I aimed for that gap, silently urging my truck to hold together for just a few more seconds behind me. I heard the screech of tires as the pickup tried to brake. I blew through the gap in the roadblock at full speed. The rush of air as I passed, rocking the patrol cars in my mirror. I saw the pickup skid to a stop, immediately surrounded by officers with weapons drawn. It was over. I'd made it. I pulled over a little way down the road, my hands shaking as I put the rig in park as the adrenaline wore off. The reality of what had just happened hit me. I'd nearly died if it hadn't been for that old CB radio in the days that followed as I gave statements to the police and tried to process the experience. I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to disaster. The men, it turned out, were part of a larger hijacking ring that had been targeting cargo trucks across several states. My cargo and my quick thinking had helped bring down their entire operation. I still drive trucks, still love the open road, but now I'm more cautious about where I stop. I keep my CB radio on and monitored at all times, and every time I pass that rest area, I say a little thank you to whatever twist of fate led me to keep that old radio around, because out here on the road, you never know when an ordinary night might turn into a fight for survival. And sometimes the difference between life and death is as simple as an old piece of equipment and a voice in the darkness saying, "This is Unit 17. Responding to your mayday." The Usted Ferris wheel creaked in the midnight breeze, a silent sentinel to the horror unfolding beneath it as I crouched behind the dilapidated ticket booth. My camera clutched to my chest. I realized with growing dread that I wasn't just documenting an abandoned amusement park. I was witnessing something far more sinister, and now I was fighting for my life. My name's Alex, and I'm a freelance photographer specializing in urban exploration. There's something hauntingly beautiful about abandoned places, and I've made a career out of capturing that beauty, but nothing in my years of experience could have prepared me for what I encountered at the old Wonderland amusement park. I'd heard rumors about Wonderland for years. It had been a thriving attraction in the 80s and 90s, but a series of accidents and financial mismanagement led to its closure in 2001. Since then, it had sat abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Urban explorers spoke of it in US used tones, describing an eerie atmosphere that went beyond the usual creepiness of abandoned places. Naturally, I had to see it for myself. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the fading light casting long shadows across the overgrown parking lot. The entrance gate hung askew, its once cheerful "Welcome to Wonderland" sign. Now faded and peeling. As I slipped through the gap camera at the ready, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something off about this place beyond the usual decay of an abandoned park. The first few hours were uneventful, if unsettling. I made my way through the park, documenting the rusted rides and crumbling buildings. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal or scurrying of some small animal. Every so often I'd catch a movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. It was nearing midnight when I reached the heart of the park. The Ferris wheel loomed above me, a skeletal giant against the star-filled sky. I was setting up a shot when I heard its voices carried on the night air. At first I thought it might be other explorers, but as I listened, I realized these voices didn't sound like excited adventurers. They were low, urgent, almost angry. Curiosity got the better of me. I packed up my gear and moved towards the sound. Using the decrepit structures for cover, as I got closer, I could make out what they were saying. "Shipment's late, boss. Ain't gonna be happy. Relax, it'll be here, cops. Don't patrol this area anymore, it's perfect." I froze. This wasn't just some late-night trespassers. Whatever was happening here, it was illegal. I should have left right then, should have snuck back to my car and driven straight to the police station, but the journalist in me couldn't resist. If there was a story here, I wanted to be the one to break it carefully. I made my way closer, my camera ready. I peered around the corner of an old concession stand, and what I saw made my blood run cold. 5 men stood in a clearing. All armed crates were stacked nearby, their contents hidden, but their purpose clear. This wasn't just some small-time operation. This was big. I raised my camera, focusing on the group. If I could get clear shots of their faces, of the crates, it would be enough evidence for the police. I held my breath and pressed the shutter. The sound of the camera seemed deafening in the quiet night for a moment. Everything froze. Then one of the men turned his eyes, locking directly on my hiding spot. "We've got company," he shouted. Raising his gun, I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. The night exploded into chaos. Shouts echoed through the abandoned park. Followed by the crack of gunfire, I ducked and weaved through the decaying structures. My heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I could hear them behind me spreading out, trying to cut off my escape routes. I knew I had one advantage. I'd spent hours exploring this park, memorizing its layout, but they had numbers, weapons, and the home field advantage. I ducked into the old fun house, hoping to lose them in the maze of mirrors and trick floors. The inside was pitch black, and I stumbled blindly, praying I wouldn't run into a wall or fall through a rotted floorboard behind me. I could hear them entering the fun house. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Reflecting crazily off the remaining mirrors, I pressed myself into a corner, trying to control my ragged breathing. Come out wherever you are." One of them called, his voice echoing unnaturally in the enclosed space. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, right," the bullet holes in the wall behind where I'd been standing said. Otherwise, I needed to find a way out, and fast. My eyes, now adjusted to the darkness, caught a glimmer of moonlight, an exit half hidden behind a fallen panel. If I could just reach it without being seen. Inched towards the exit, every creak of the floorboard sounding like a gunshot to my ears. I was almost there when a board gave way under my foot. I stumbled, knocking into a mirror that shattered with a crash. There, I didn't look back. I dove for the exit. Feeling the wind of a bullet passing far too close to my head, I burst out of the funhouse and ran no longer. Caring about stealth, just focused on putting as much distance between myself and my pursuers as possible. I found myself in the old Midway, surrounded by dilapidated game booths. In desperation, I ducked into one. Huddling beneath the counter, I could hear them spreading out. Searching methodically, it was only a matter of time before they found me as I crouched there, trying to quiet my breathing. My hand brushed against something. I looked down and almost laughed. It was one of those old air rifles from a shooting gallery, probably left behind when the park closed. It wouldn't do much against real guns, but maybe an idea formed, a crazy, desperate idea. But it was all I had. I waited until I heard footsteps approaching my hiding spot. Then, taking a deep breath, I popped up and fired the air rifle. It let out a loud pop, not unlike a real gunshot. The effect was immediate. The men scattered, diving for cover in the confusion. I made a break for it, running full tilt towards the park entrance. I could hear shouting behind me as they realized the trick, but I had a head start. Now my lungs were burning, my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. The entrance gate came into view, and with it my car parked just outside. I'd never been so happy to see that beat-up old Civic in my life. I reached the car, fumbling with my key behind me. I could hear them getting closer. The key slid home, and I yanked the door open. Throwing myself inside, the engine roared to life. Just as they burst out of the park entrance, I threw the car into reverse tires, squealing. As I peeled out of the parking lot in my rearview mirror, I saw them pile into a van, ready to give chase. What followed was the most terrifying drive of my life. I sped down abandoned back roads, the van close behind. Every turn was a gamble, every straightaway a chance for them to gain ground. It wasn't until I reached the highway, merging into late-night traffic, that I finally lost them. Even then, I didn't slow down until I reached the nearest police station. The next few days were a blur of police statements and news interviews. My photos, along with my testimony, were enough to bring down a major weapon smuggling operation. The abandoned park had been their base of operations for years, hidden in plain sight. I've been asked many times if I regret going to Wonderland that night, knowing what I know now. The truth is, I don't. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, I came closer to death than I ever want to again. But we exposed a dangerous criminal operation and made the world a little bit safer these days. I still explore abandoned places, but now I'm a lot more careful about what I might find, because sometimes the real danger isn't in the decay or the darkness. Sometimes it's in the secrets these forgotten places hold. and the people willing to kill to keep those secrets hidden. So the next time you pass an abandoned amusement park and feel tempted to explore, remember my story, because you never know what might be lurking behind that rusted gate, waiting in the shadows of the silent rides. And unlike in the funhouse, the dangers you face might be all too real.